Shankar.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to you all. Thank you for joining us at the online National Leadership Conclave of All India Management Association. The theme of this conclave this year is the big disruption, leadership in the post-COVID world. And we are privileged to have most distinguished lineup of speakers, dignitaries, and very eminent audience from across India who have joined us for the conclave. We received more than 5,000 registrations for the conclave, which is being organized on a specially curated digital platform. Live streaming of AIMA's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter channels is also expected to increase the reach of the program. We would like to thank all our sponsors who supported the conclave and made it possible for us to organize it this year. We especially thank our co-sponsors, Kevin Care Private Limited, Hero Enterprise, JK Paper Limited, and RP-Sanjiv Goenka Group. Associate sponsors, Kirloskar Brothers and Vodafone Idea Limited. Corporate sponsors, BSE, Indian Oil Corporation Limited, and Tata Chemicals. Our committee of hosts, Dempo Group of Companies, Nico Engineering Services Limited, and Patton International. A very big thank you to all our sponsors for making this happen in this very, very difficult year. Ladies and gentlemen, all through the conclave, we'll be conducting live polls during the sessions. Click on the poll button visible towards the right side of the video screen to view the poll questions and participate by sharing your opinion online. All questions during the conclave session will be taken through the chat only. Please do submit your questions in the chat box and specify the speaker it is addressed to. We invite you to join us for as many sessions as possible, and we do hope you would enjoy being part of this conclave. In case of disconnection, you can rejoin the session by yourself without any difficulty using the same login link and credentials. We are now starting the sessions, and may I request Ms. Rekha Sethi, Director General AIMA, to initiate the proceedings. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to welcome you all to a very special edition of AIMA's National Leadership Conclave. We will now start the program with Plenary 1 with a conversation on India's place in the New World Order and how India can deal with geopolitical churn. In this session, we will discuss how India can use the disruption of international alliances and institutions to strengthen its security and gain an economic advantage. I'm delighted to welcome on the virtual stage Dr. S. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, Mr. Harshpati Singhania, President AIMA, and Vice Chairman and Managing Director, JK Paper Limited, Dr. Sanjiv Goenka, Co-Chairman, NLC 2021 and Chairman, RP-Sanjiv Goenka Group, and Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, Co-Chairman, NLC 2021 and Chairman, Hero Enterprises. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome them all with a huge round of applause. May I now invite Mr. Hashpati Singhania to give the welcome address.
Dr. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs, Government of India. My friends, Sunil Kant Munjal, Co-Chair NLC 2021 and Chairman Hero Enterprises, and Sanjiv Goenka, Co-Chair NLC 2021 and Chairman RP-Sanjiv Goenka Group, members, past presidents of AIMA, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you today and a very warm welcome to everyone at AIMA's 6th National Leadership Conclave. The NLC is one of the flagship events of AIMA and for many years has been a popular forum for India's ministers, bureaucrats, business leaders, academics, and experts to present and exchange new ideas on strengthening India. Today, we are privileged to start the NLC with a talk by one of India's most important and influential leaders, Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Minister of External Affairs, Government of India. Jaishankar ji, it's a pleasure to have you on the AIMA platform today, and perhaps for the first time at AIMA. You have been one of India's most industrious diplomats, and your imprint is particularly strong on India's relationship with the US and China, as well as our relationship with Russia and Eastern Europe in the post-Cold War world. Thank you for joining us, and a very warm welcome to you, sir. It is my privilege now to welcome the two co-chairs and architects, if I may say, of the NLC this year. Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, many thanks for co-chairing the NLC this year. A past president of AIMA, a successful businessman, and one of the prominent spokespersons for Indian industry across many fora. You are a keen observer of policy making and also a thought leader. Thank you for being here, despite being in a different location. Mr. Sanjiv Goenka, you are the founder of this event, and AIMA is grateful to you for your continued involvement in the NLC. Also a past president of AIMA and someone who oversees a large business group with diversified interests, it's a pleasure to have you. Ladies and gentlemen, the overarching focus of this NLC is on leadership in the post-COVID world after the big disruption. On a lighter note, dare I say, when we were designing the conference, we used the nomenclature of post-COVID. The way we are sitting today, I do not know whether we are post-COVID. But anyway, in fact, the disruption has not gone away and is casting a shadow on life, business, and governance. COVID is reshaping geopolitics. The origin of the pandemic in China and the disruption of global supply chains owing to the lockdowns have pushed the world to have a rethink on reducing its dependence on China and foster new relations. Closer home, China's recent infiltration at India's LAC during the COVID crisis has necessitated us to re-examine an already finely balanced relationship. A new world order is taking shape, one of contained globalization, and India has a big role to play in it. This was already set in motion with Atmanirbhar Bharat Yojana, positioning India as an alternative manufacturing hub. However, the restructuring of economic policy and bridging the trust deficit will have to go hand in hand for India. We would have to play a greater role in regional institutions like SAARC and ASEAN and have a deeper engagement in the Quad by rallying like-minded nations. A new US administration and changed equations in the UK and Euro area post-Brexit also offer an opportunity to India to play a strategic role in the post-COVID world. Our role in international vaccine distribution has also created favorable optics in this new world order. We look forward to hearing from Dr. Jaishankar in this session on how India can claim a rightful place in the new world order and how it can deal with the uncertainty of the post-COVID geopolitics. Mr. Sunil Munjal will be in conversation with him. It is now my pleasure to request Mr. Goenka, the co-chair of this conference, to formally introduce the Honorable Minister. Sanjiv, over to you.
Thank you, Harsh. Dr. Jaishankar, Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, my very close friends, Harsh and Sunil, Rekha, ladies and gentlemen. It is my special privilege today to introduce Dr. Jaishankar, a special man with special qualities, whose presence, whose participation makes this event that much more meaningful. He's a man who's revolutionizing India's foreign policy. He's a man who's rewriting India's role in global affairs. He's a man who's reinventing India's strategic thinking. He's a man who has energized Indian diplomacy. Thanks to him, and thanks to the Prime Minister, every Indian today holds his head high. Dr. External Affairs Minister of India and our special guest today epitomizes the spirit of a new, assertive, confident India. Dr. Jaishankar, a very, very warm welcome to you on the AIMA platform. He's always sought transformative assignments. He's been involved with, and he has led several key initiatives, not least with US, with China, with Japan. As the world order changed again with the rise of an assertive China, he was in the middle of the action again in the tumultuous period of global financial crisis and the resulting shift of global economic gravity towards China. He served as India's ambassador in Beijing from 2009 to 2013. He managed to improve economic, strategic, and cultural relations between India and China, and also managed to keep the border disputes under check. Now, he is playing a central role in building an international coalition to check China's hegemonic aggression. After 3 years of extraordinarily distinguished service in diplomacy, he's now playing a huge role in redefining India's position, India's role, India's stature in the emerging world order. Once again, sir, a very, very warm welcome to you. You're a man we all respect, we all admire, we all look up to. And your gracing this occasion means the world to us. Thank you, sir. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, co-chair of the conclave, to conduct the conversation with the Honorable Minister. Sunil.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanju. Minister, thank you for making the time. I'm going to pick a few pointers from the comments made by Sanjiv, Harsh, and Rekha. I have a few of my own, and we've also invited the audience to send in their questions. So off and on, I will pick one from there as well. Since we were talking about this being a situation which has impacted the whole world, when I'm saying this, I'm talking about the pandemic right now. A couple of months ago, it looked like we were coming out of this. It certainly does not look like that today. So to your mind, what are the big lessons that the pandemic has taught us just this past 1 year itself?
First of all, Let me begin by saying that it's a great pleasure to be with all of you today. And Harshji is right. This is my first participation at the National Leadership Conclave of the AIMA. I thank you for inviting me to share my views with you. And it's a great pleasure, it's a great pleasure to meet friends today, and it's a safe pleasure when you meet them digitally. So good to see you. So let's start with the pandemic. I again agree with Harshji that we shouldn't yet be talking about post-COVID, though our thoughts should go there. We are very much in the middle of COVID, no question about it. Now, what is the situation today? Okay, I think anybody who's honest about it, if you're not sort of doing the blame game routine, which often characterizes our politics, I think people would accept that there is today, multiple variants at play, which whose potency and whose infectivity was not naturally realized earlier. You have the UK variant, you have the South African variant, and you have the double mutant, which is today impacting especially the western region of the country. And in all of this, I think it's also a reality that there was a lot of societal complacency. I think for any of us to point a finger at anybody else, I think is a very short-sighted attitude, because the fact is everybody was complacent for a certain period, because there was a sense in January, February, because I will look at our February numbers. Our February numbers had really come down very, very dramatically. Now, rather than get into what went wrong and who's to blame and what could we have done, I want us all to step back and look actually at the long-term problem and potentially the long-term answer. And the fact is that, what the pandemic has brought out are actually deficiencies in our developmental model, in our progress, in our health infrastructure. And it's like, if you subject a system to stress, all the cracks and the gaps show up in that period. Now, a year ago, I want you all to go back and think about it. We were scrambling a year ago. How do we all make masks? How do you make PPEs? Where do you get the ventilators from? And, the country sort of pulled up its socks, came together, and one part of us recognized that we should have had all those things in some quantity earlier, that there was, that our way of doing business, our vision of development was inadequately anchored in our own capabilities, that we were far too dependent on supply chains abroad, and here I have a bit of a bone to pick with business. I would say that very candidly. I think business is very fixated on its bottom lines and is not doing enough to build its own supply chains at home. But I'll come to that later in the conversation. I'm throwing it out as a provocation early in the talk. But look, the fact is today, if, I'm just giving you an example. Let us say if there's a huge surge in demand for medical oxygen, somewhere one part of us collective us should be asking ourselves, why isn't there enough medical oxygen production at home? So I think there are long-term lessons. There are two kinds. There is that finger-pointing, blame game thing. I mean, I put that to a certain kind of mindset and a lack of, I don't consider that a responsible conversation. But I think for an association like yours, which is so deeply anchored in industry, this is a moment really to reflect on how do we build deeper strengths, capacities which would allow us to face this kind of storms in the future. For me, the great takeaway in the making is that this is a lesson to us that you cannot, you can't take risks in good times and think that the risks will not come back to haunt you in tough times. All the pressures on us today to ramp up production, etc., I hope as a country, as an economy, as an industry, all of us take that as a sort of a message that we need to build very much stronger and very much deeper at home.
Point well made. I'm tempted to respond, but I have a list of questions with me I want to go through before I respond to the question that you have raised. Let me go a little bit to this nationalism that we are seeing around the COVID, around vaccine, around production of medication and others. How do you think it would impact the WHO's program and the Gary program, which was supposed to provide for those who cannot otherwise manage? Because there is both sides to it. As you know, one can understand, there is a need for countries. We are hearing it in India itself. People are saying, why are you exporting the vaccine when you need it here? And the same thing is happening in other countries. So I'm leading off the question from there.
I look, Sunilji, I think that's a very legitimate question. And again, I would say the blame game walas will have their attitude and their approach. And I think as serious people, let's look at it. Today, as foreign minister, I am pushing other countries, particularly some big countries, saying, look, please keep the raw materials flowing for vaccines to be made in India. Okay. Now, why am I doing that? Because the fact is that there are global supply chains. There is nothing is made. Very few things are made exclusively in one geography. Very few societies can say we are autonomous of our reliance on others. So ask yourself this question. Can I, on the one hand, go around the world and tell people, guys, keep your supply chains flowing towards me? And by the way, the end product of that supply chain, I'm asking you for raw material, but I'm not going to give you the vaccine. So now, and look at the vaccine itself. I mean, today, your largest vaccine under production is an international product. It's a co-creation. It's a co-production. So, I think those who talk about, why are you doing this for the world? Why are we not? It's not that we are not prioritizing our people. I mean, as things got tough, we actually spoke to the world very honestly and said, look, we tried, we have done our best to live up to commitments, contractual commitments of producers, COVAX commitments, the Gavi stuff you spoke about. But right now, please understand that I have this very serious situation at home, and I think most countries understand that. But if you get into this, why are you exporting abroad at all? Then somebody else will ask, why am I exporting to India? And that is so short-sighted. I mean, only really irresponsible people, really non-serious people can make that kind of argument. And by the way, there are some around, as you would have noticed.
Correct. Yeah, you're right. Actually, we are more in agreement than you would imagine with this approach.
No, I imagine it from you. I have no problem. I know that.
But also going back, if you see, the entire world actually gained significantly from the globalization that was going on. And this part of it happened with China, Russia, US pulling in different directions. Then the previous president we had in the US also caused some of this looking inwards. And then country after country started to close their borders in a manner of speaking. The reality is information flow is global right now. Supply chains are global right now, exactly as you mentioned. So the question that people are now asking is, what does Atmanirbhar Bharat translate into? Will it isolate India? How will it impact India's foreign policy and its approach to business and economy?
Sunilji, first of all, I would contest the assumption with which you started. Entire world gained by globalization. I don't agree. I think Many countries gained very much more, some gained less, some did not gain at all. More important, within countries, some people gained, many people actually lost. And what you saw, particularly in the United States, sure, I mean, you want to see the advocates of globalization, go to New York. Okay, look at the Wall Street. Everybody is for it. The old political establishment loved it. Go out to what they call Middle America. After all, why did you have the Trump phenomenon? Precisely because masses of people saw their quality of life, their employment opportunities actually negatively impacted by globalization. But I don't want to only talk about America. Look at our own country. I mean, you're all in business. Can you really tell me in the last 15 years globalization has worked for everybody? I mean, would you look me in the eye and say your industrial estates and your MSMEs have not been affected by cheap imports from subsidized economies? Has it not impacted employment in this country? So you have to understand, I mean, we haven't had fair growth. We may, GDP numbers look great, but GDP numbers don't translate necessarily into the right employment numbers. So you've had a growing employment problem precisely because globalization skewed your economic fairness and economic opportunities within the country. So today, the fundamental, I would say, assumption behind Atmanirbhar Bharat is to have a kind of human-centric, or I would say in economic terms, employment-centric growth. Look, you guys could all do well. It doesn't mean that some guy in Noida or somewhere else gets a job. I need to ensure that as well. And I think a lot of our challenges are not different from, it's a variation of what happened in the US or what may be happening in other parts of the world. So I think we need today manufacturing expansion at home, services growth at home, a transformed agriculture, most of all, a kind of a economic mentality which doesn't say, I will look after my bottom lines. I am prepared to do, sort of integrate supply chains from abroad. I really don't care what happens to my people and my smaller enterprises at home. And somehow it's the government's obligation to de-risk all of that. I actually hear that. I've seen people in the business community, some of whom are professionally given to giving advice to the government, take this external supply chain as some kind of entitlement. And they actually think the government is obliged to secure it for them. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to make sure that you guys all build businesses at home which will give employment at home. So I think that we need a fundamental mindset change. Somewhere what started off as a good thing, a great thing, and all of us supported it, the 91-92 reforms, I think it got off track. And somewhere we lost the sense of who's benefiting from that, and more important, who's not benefiting from that at home. And I hope very much that this crisis will actually reinforce that. Because what the pandemic has done is it has actually expanded our sense of security. Today we are thinking of health security. We are thinking, many countries thinking food security. We don't fortunately have that problem. But certainly, I mean, to me, again, don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing for return to the past. I'm not arguing, my idea is not that government should take over stuff. But I do think that Indian industry owes it to India and the Indian people to create supply chains at home, to constantly, shall I say, update that kind of pyramid on which you're all sitting at the top, and find a way by which the country buys in to the larger economic path.
So good, thank you. So it's a longer conversation. I'm happy to have that with you as to what the Indian industry is both able and willing to do at this moment, especially in supporting the country and all its people in the crisis. And you're right, there are some in industry who could become more responsible. But to be fair, there are plenty in industry today who are both willing and wanting to play a bigger and a more responsible role, not just towards themselves or their bottom lines, but to a much larger responsibility. And I think that's only right. It's only expected. Let me shift gears a little bit. I have a question from Ganesh Natarajan. This is about China, and it says, Ambassador Jaishankar, nobody knows the country better than you. With their economic and military strength over India at this point, what form of diplomacy are the options available to us to counter and overcome their aggression?
You know, look, if you look at the last 40 years, Sunilji, you know, we've had peace and tranquility on the border. I'm not suggesting that we solve the boundary dispute. You know, I'm not, thinking that this is something easy or that it was round the corner. I mean, we've been very honest about the complexity of it. But the fact was that the rest of our relationship got built because of an assumption that, you know, neither party would use force, neither party would threaten the other. We had different agreements which translated those, good intentions into commitments. Now, last year, that changed. You know, the Chinese, with no provocation, brought an enormous force to the border, as you all know. Now, the point is very, very simple. I mean, this is not rocket science. You know, you cannot completely sort of disrupt the peace and tranquility on the border and then carry on with the rest of the relationship. I mean, I've been saying it for the last year and I will continue to say it. It has not changed. You know, and if this relationship is to progress, I must have a return to peace and tranquility on the border. There's no two ways about it.
Absolutely. You know, this is a clear requirement for any of us to live today in the world, is to have peace and tranquility, both for civil as also for economic and business needs. It is a complex situation, no doubt. Moving a little bit towards newer developments, could the Quad become another NATO, or would it do you ever foresee it having a NATO-like stature, ability, strength, influence, etc.?
A short answer, no. Okay, then I'll give you the longer answer. Look, we have, because we regained our independence in 47 and we value it because it was achieved after so many decades of struggle, we have stayed away from alliances. And in many ways, actually, as a country, we don't know what all of that means. I mean, because we never bought into it. Okay? The people who use that NATO kind of analogy, either they don't understand us at all and don't know where we are coming from and what our independence means to us and what is the mindset of India. So, one explanation I have is complete ignorance or lack of understanding of the Indian mindset. Or the other, they actually are doing, using these words deliberately to kind of, I would say, discourage us or dissuade us or mislead us from doing what is in our own interest. So what is our interest? Our interest is today, as a country, just like it would be in any other sphere. I mean, I would say this would apply to us, maybe the four of us as people, or it could apply to three of you as businesses. If you have common interests, it is very natural for parties which have common interests to say, okay, let's find a way of working that together. I mean, you have AIMA, or three of you are together because you have a common interest. So think of Quad as a common platform of 4 important players who actually are looking at demands, unmet demands in the market, if you would. So at a recent conference, in fact, I gave some examples. I said, look, what is it we discuss when we meet in the Quad? We're discussing, okay, vaccine production. What do I do with critical and emerging technologies? How do we ensure that our students move around or travel takes place in a COVID environment more easily? How do I deal with issues like maritime security or cyber security? So it's very reasonable in international relations for countries which have convergences and agreements and common interests and shared interests to work together. But I wouldn't exaggerate this and frankly wrongly depict it to sort of create that imagery of NATO, military alliance, Cold War, etc. Because that's never been India's heritage. In fact, if you look, that kind of thinking was something which other countries in Asia used to propagate favorably in the 1970s and 1980s. So even during Cold War, we stayed away from NATO. Not everybody in Asia did. So it's natural for those guys to use it, NATO. I don't buy into that analogy at all.
Do you think, since you talked of common interest, you spoke of business and economy, do you think that could get a leg up between the Quad members to work closer together in use of technology, something you mentioned, and now technology increasingly is a driver for civil society, economy, and business. So do you think this could be leverage for these countries to work together on the economic side?
Absolutely. Absolutely, for a variety of reasons. One, I think from the stresses of COVID, but even predating the COVID, today, like in business, in international relations too, trust has become a kind of a premium commodity. Okay. Reliability is also become more important. We all want to, do business with each other in a way in which we don't feel it is being unfairly leveraged. Okay. So I think when you are looking at the world ahead, countries would be more comfortable with partners who would not, in their view, leverage technology or link trade to non-trade issues. So there would be those, again, as I say, like in a society with human beings, those who would have greater comfort with each other and those who may not have the same degree of comfort with each other. And I would certainly, to my mind, when I look at Quad, because you mentioned Quad specifically, when I look at the US, I look at Japan, I look at Australia, these are all countries where we have very strong relationships. There's a great deal of comfort. There's a lot of business to be done. Each of these relationships, I can see autonomously a great future. And I think if you have the ability to work together collectively, that is more. But having said that, I would say there would be others. We've had to, look at sort of rescheduling the visit of Prime Minister Boris Johnson. But certainly it's our expectation with the UK, for example, that we would be doing more business in the years to come. I just had the French foreign minister. We spent a lot of our time really discussing what the possibilities are with France and with EU. So I do think that today what COVID has done is it has brought into the debate, into the global debate, and by the way, this is exactly what I was discussing yesterday in Abu Dhabi, that a sense that today India is a good platform for global production. I think the world is comfortable to see more production out of India. We are a market economy. We are an open society. our mindset is global. If I say so myself, I would say by and large the world trusts us. I really think this is the time to step up. So if I were to put your two questions together, which is Atmanirbhar Bharat, which gives me more capacity, and this environment, which gives me a more trusted profile, better branding, if you would, I think there are possibilities there.
So let me push a little bit beyond this point you made. You made a point of the positive side of the good connections that many of these nations are demonstrating, need to work together, more friendship, etc. At the same time, there are also hotspots. There are also some old fault lines starting to show up again. There are some new ones getting developed. There are points of tension that we have seen getting to really to a point where they're becoming serious conflicts or near conflicts. Do you believe, do you see a possibility of a war-like situation anywhere in the world before we settle down to what looks like could be the new world order that you're talking about?
There could be local conflicts, some of them very significant. We are looking at a very worrisome situation, say in Afghanistan. Okay. And there are ongoing conflicts, say in a geography like Africa. So there will always be conflicts in the world, but I think at a kind of a mega level, between the really big powers, I think that era is behind us. That era is behind us because all said and done, I spoke to you earlier that globalization has not been fair, but that doesn't mean globalization has not been real. Okay, I think we are a very globalized world. There is enormous interdependence and interpenetration. Among the major players, if they do things, it will have a cascading impact on themselves. So they are so interlinked with each other. So a lot of what you hear, among the favorite theories of the last decade or two has been, for example, this whole Thucydides trap. Look, these are mind games. These are ways of, it's like my telling you, don't do this or else. So it's a way of discouraging you from exploring options. So that's part of diplomacy.
We hear that in the stock market very, very often, by the way. You better cash in, now it's going up, or you better cash out, it's going to collapse. It happens very often, you're right. I have a question from Zubin Kabraji. Says, with the exit of US forces, and I'm taking you up on Afghanistan that you mentioned, do you see a larger role for India to play in the region economically and the larger geopolitical framework? In a sense, you referred to this, the US government has hinted at this, that India needs to come in and be more a part of this conversation. Where do you see this ending up in terms of India playing a more active role here?
India has always played an active role in Afghanistan, not just after 2001, even before 2001. Okay, Afghanistan is a doorstep away. So how can we not have a role, influence, presence, activity out there? It is just that you sort of select your pathway or your platform which is suited to the situation. Okay. Now, in the post 9/11, post 2001 situation, for us the best way of helping out was through developmental projects and socio-economic activity, because other people were doing other things, and our intention, after all, of going there was not to do one-upmanship. Our intention of being there was to help out and contribute to a larger global endeavor. Now, in the last 20 years, what that has done is it has won us a lot of friends. It has created a great goodwill for India, a lot of acceptability for India. People look at us in the last 20 years and associate us with the good things in Afghanistan. Okay? And in the same period, there have been some tough things which happen. A lot of that gets blamed on somebody else who you and I both know. When we look at the future ahead, I think it's important for us to work with the international community. And see from our strengths and our capability and our networking and our relationships, where is it that we can help to create a better Afghanistan? Because the point I keep making is, look, at the end of the day, our relationship is with the Afghan people. Okay? We are not there to play politics. We are not there to say this is my favorite and that is not my favorite. That's not the game we are playing. We are actually playing a larger stability, development, progress, prosperity game.
So, Minister Jaishankar, that was very well covered. We have only 2 minutes to go, and I have a long list of questions. Instead of my asking you a question, let me ask you, is there a comment you would like to make to us, which you think is important? You started off with some comments regarding the COVID and industry's role. Is there anything else you think from diplomacy, geopolitics, geoeconomics, is a comment you would like to make to us right now as we close this session?
You know, the only comment that comes readily to my mind, and I say this from a brief stint which I did in the corporate sector after leaving the government and before I came back to it, I do think that there has to be a stronger partnership between business and government in taking forward our national development. I mean, I know I know all of you, of course, but I know so many of you. And I know, look, everybody wants, you are just as nationalistic and patriotic and aspirational as everybody else. But I do feel we need to think much more, in a sense, much more, CSR should not be a box to check and a check to write, okay? Or even a project to make. There's got to be a CSR mentality. And when I look, I spent a lot of my life, 5 years in Japan, 3 years in Singapore, 4.5 years in China. And these were the countries where actually the economies got built in this era. I think the government-business partnership, because at the end of the day, when I look at business, for me, business are employment creators. And to my mind, how do we build a stronger national economic base? Because that is the big takeaway from the COVID experience, that we have to de-risk our interaction with the world by actually having a stronger baseline at home. And I think I would hope very much the post-COVID conversations are focused on that line of thinking.
Minister Jaishankar, thank you very much for a very comprehensive, very straightforward and open dialogue. This truly helped us start the National Leadership Conclave on a high. Thank you very much, as always, for a wonderfully interactive session with you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we have come to the end of the first session of the conclave. The next session starts in 10 minutes. Please stay tuned. Thank you.
Please confirm if I can start.
Yes, please.
Welcome back to Plenary 2, a fireside chat on digital nation technology for everyone. In this session, we will discuss how India can harness technology to augment its material and human resources to offer a better quality of life to all Indians. We are honored to have a very special person with us this evening who has made a major contribution to India's dominance in the global IT business and who has provided a definitive blueprint for an inclusive digital India in his book, Digital Nation. Mr. N. Chandrasekaran, Chairman Tata Sons, an honor to have you with us today and a very warm welcome to you. I'm also pleased to welcome on the virtual dais Mr. Harshpati Singhania, President AIMA, and Mr. Vikram Chandra, Founder, Editor G Technologies. May I now request Mr. Singhania to introduce the session.
Thanks, Rekha. Sri N. Chandrasekaran, Chairman Tata Sons, Sri Vikram Chandra, Founder, Editor G Technologies, gathered delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a session with a very special business leader. He is the chairman of India's foremost business group, the Tata Group, and one of India's most influential leaders. As the first professional to head the group, he oversees very large and diverse businesses spanning across the globe. He is also a well-recognized face of the Indian IT industry, but he looks at technology from the lens of public welfare. In his book, Digital Nation, Solving Technology's People Problem, he has offered strategies to overcome India's shortcomings and alleviate shortages with the help of technology. Mr. Chandrasekaran, or Chandra, as you are popularly known, it's indeed a pleasure to have you with us, and many thanks for agreeing to do this session. Through your book, you have tried to provide a nuanced perspective of technology as a force of positive transformation. We look forward to hearing your views on how technology can be used to enhance the potential of the ordinary people and improve their lives, and how it can be a bridge between the haves and have-nots. A very warm welcome to you again. Vikram, a veteran of TV journalism with 22 years plus at NDTV, and now in your new avatar as founder of Editor G Technologies, you have been reporting and analyzing events and issues from politics to defense, from economy to technology. Given your passion about technology, it's great to have you moderate this session with Chandra. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, these days, there is a great polarization on the role and use of digital technologies. Some see technology as a panacea for all shortcomings, whereas others see it as a means to concentrated power and wealth. Some see it as a threat to their jobs and way of life. Others see it as a ticket to economic freedom and a better quality of life. Mr. Chandrasekaran's book tries to show that instead of accepting technology as an inevitable replacement for human labor, we can use it as an aid. History tells us that every time a new technology emerges, which can change the way people live, work, organize, and mobilize, the transition is intermittent before it becomes normal. There is much talk about the coming doom of jobs and businesses, despite the historical evidence that every new technology ends up multiplying the economy by turning more people into producers and consumers. We are privileged to have Mr. Chandrasekaran with us, and we would like to learn from this conversation as to why India's future is linked to its use of technology. Maybe Mr. Chandrasekaran will draw some examples from his own group and share his experiences. It is now my pleasure to request Vikram to conduct this session. All over to you, Vikram.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Singhania. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be with us, to be here. And it's a particular privilege to be speaking to Mr. Chandrasekaran, or Chandra, as I am going to call him for the rest of this session, because he is both one of the finest thinkers and one of the finest minds in corporate India whom I have encountered. And it's increasingly infrequent that he comes and speaks to us. So it's a real pleasure and a privilege to be talking to you today. I am going to talk at some length and ask you about technology and digital nation and how do we use technology to fix the world. But if I could first start by asking you about the state of the world and ask in particular the situation that we seem to be finding ourselves in right now here in this country, because it's looking quite dark out there right now. So I just wanted to get your sense. You must be having a lot of people you're talking to. What's the sense that you're picking up? Where are we?
Thank you, Vikram, and thank you, AIMA, for this opportunity. It's my pleasure to be with all of you and share a few thoughts today. Let me address your question with some balanced view. Needless to say, the last 12 to 15 months has been very, very unprecedented. Certainly the most unprecedented times in our lifetime. On the one hand, we have seen a lot of hardship, a lot of struggle, a lot of uncertainty, both economically, health-wise, in our social lives, and it has been very, very difficult. On the other hand, we have also advanced significantly in terms of the future in which the world needs to move. Certain things which needed to be addressed have become very definitive, and so they will get addressed. Let me give a couple of points before coming to India. From the economy point of view, the decisions across the world to provide the right level of fiscal and monetary support has ensured that the economy is recovering in different parts of the world. Obviously, this economic recovery is not going to be uniform. In some nations, especially some advanced nations, also in China, the recovery is going to be faster. And in the emerging markets, the recovery is going to be slower compared to some of these nations. But overall, the world GDP will definitely grow 5, 6, 7%, depending upon who you talk to, albeit after a shrinkage in the last 4 months. From the advancement point of view, I want to make 2 or 3 points. The world needed to go digital. The pandemic has ensured everyone not only believes in digital, has adopted digital. Whether you are from a poor country or from a rich country, whether you are an old person or a young person, whether you are rich or poor, doesn't matter. Gender, diversity, race, doesn't matter. It has been uniformly accepted. I think the world has gained a 10-year advantage in accelerating digital. The second significant shift, as far as I'm concerned, is finally the line has been drawn on sustainability. I don't think that people are going to argue too much. And now everyone will move towards a low carbon economy. The sustainability, which was much needed to be addressed with utmost urgency, will get addressed. Everybody will put their weight behind it. Still, everybody may not agree to the same date, same level of commitments, but the point is that the world is coming together, and that is a good thing. The third thing is, to my mind, the most important thing, people have realized the importance of public health. The world cannot be a healthy place and safe place if some people are healthy and can get all the medical attention and others don't get. I think the healthcare and public health will receive a lot of attention, will receive a lot of funding, a lot of new innovations will happen, and it will get addressed much faster and at scale globally. I think these are all positive impact of the pandemic. Now, coming home, obviously, if you had this conversation about 6 weeks ago, we would only be talking positive stuff because the economic recovery has been spectacular, I would say. If you had asked me after the lockdown last year, at the end of 3 months, practically there was no sales. Plants were shut down and hardly any production. And June, July, August, when the demand started picking up, one felt that it's all pent-up demand. But then the recovery over August to March has been really so good that it has surprised everyone. All the industrial sectors have done very well. Core sectors, whether it is a cement or auto, have done very well. The recovery in the last quarter of the last fiscal was also very strong. Yes, the services sector still suffered because there has been some kind of a restriction or a lockdown or a limited operation for different service sectors in different parts of the country. So far it has been good. But then the second wave, currently what we are witnessing, is quite concerning and scary. I think the most important thing now is to manage the current situation very delicately. On the one hand, we've got to protect people. We've got to ensure that people don't end up in hospitals in large numbers. And at the same time, we protect the economy because there are segments of the society who will suffer so strongly with a severe economic disruption. That is a fact of reality. So we don't have an either or option. Unfortunately, often we like the binaries, but this is not a binary option. This needs to be carefully managed, and we need to vaccinate at a level of urgency that we have never taken any initiative with that pace. So I think a lot needs to be done, but otherwise I think I don't know what will be the situation in 2-3 months, but it will be a wrong day today to say too much about the economy because there is a lot of suffering. And we need oxygen, we need hospital beds, we need the vaccines, we need the remdesivir, we need so many things, medicines. So in a manner of speaking, today everybody's attention is to address these things. So I don't want to dwell too much into the economy, but I believe that the economic recovery has been quite solid, and we need to manage this next, I don't know how long, maybe 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, very diligently as a country.
Do you feel, Chandra, that it's almost like a second black swan hitting us? Because pandemic was around. It's not that people thought that the pandemic was over, it had gone away. But if you would ask anybody in the month of February or the middle of February that 6 weeks or 8 weeks from then, you're going to be in a situation where you're seeing 270,000 cases a day, and city after city, Delhi has had to lock down because there's really no alternative. If you don't lock down, there are no hospital beds. There are people who are going to be dying literally on the streets if you're not careful. So the savageness of the second wave, or the second tsunami, as I think we can call it, is that almost been like a black swan, which has taken everyone by surprise. And could that therefore have a lot of impact? People aren't ready for this.
Yeah, I think no one has been able to predict the behavior of the pandemic in the last 12 months.
Yeah.
So if you really look at who have been better at handling the pandemic on a given day, it has shifted. One day it was Sweden. One day it was India. One day it was UK, who just couldn't get their arms around the problem. And now UK seems to have done it. So I think it's very unfair to be criticizing every day somebody. Because the nature of the beast is such, it has had a lot of unpredictability. No one predicted so many variants. We are learning new terms. Variants, mutation, double mutation. I mean, every single day there are new things that we are learning. And yes, we are. I think the way it has ramped up in the last 10 days or 2 weeks has taken everybody by surprise.
Right.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
But when you talk about one of the basic themes of Digital Nation and others is that how can we use technology to really transform economies, transform people, and to solve some of the major problems. Now, let's apply that to the biggest crisis that the world is facing. And it's one of the biggest crises I think the world has ever faced, Turkey, in a really long time. To some extent, you can argue that technology did its part by getting a vaccine so soon, right? It was normally vaccines take 3 years, 4 years, and the vaccine came really fast, and other things have happened as well. How would you use technology now to try and say, okay, this is what we can do? How do we use technology to try and get ourselves out of the hole that we seem to be?
I think there are two aspects, Vikram. One is, what do we do in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 1 month? It's very difficult to come up with a magic wand to say that you do this in 4 weeks, you'll be fine. But I think what we should be doing is to definitely go in this direction and accelerate it. Let me just give a few points here. Digital Nation is about solving India's biggest problems using technology. To my mind, the biggest problems we have fallen into two categories: access and jobs. When I say access or the lack of it. Vast majority of the people in this country still don't have access to basic things. It is very common that you can find examples when people have to travel overnight just to get a basic medical help, primary health care. It's easy to find kids not having access to school, having to spend 4 hours, 5 hours to get basic education. Sometimes cannot have access to that basic education. I'm not even talking about tertiary education, even the primary, secondary education. And we have acute shortage of resources. On the other hand, we have huge jobs crisis. We need to create 100 million jobs in the next 10 years, all of you know. And so we have a lot of people. And we have all along been trying to solve each one of these problems individually. To my mind, technology is the solution. And by effectively deploying AI and machine learning and all the other related digital technologies, on the one hand, you will solve access. In the process, you will create a lot of jobs. And when I say you will solve access, you will be able to extend healthcare because you can't build hospitals everywhere. It's a very time-consuming affair. You cannot create another 500,000 doctors in the next 1 year. That's a time-consuming affair. The way to do this is to create people who can do higher-level jobs. Most of our jobs are informal. We already have a shortage of jobs. And even the people who are employed or in the informal sector, more than 70% of our jobs are informal. Actually, Digital Nation, the book itself, could not explain so vividly what the pandemic has done. The pandemic has really brought the lack of access in healthcare and the problem in running an economy with such a high percentage of informal workers, where they had to flee so vividly to light. The exact two problems Digital Nation tries to explain and solve. So to my mind, there are 3 things I will say. One, if you are able to bring technology to the low-skilled and no-skilled people, you will upgrade their skills. They will be able to offer and do jobs which is at a higher level. In a typical hospital scenario, you have a surgeon. Surgeon is a specialist, but he or she does only 50% of the time what they only can do. Remaining 50% of the time, they're ending up backfilling for lower level jobs because we have this missing middle in India. By deliberately using technology, you can upgrade skills so that all the job can be newly created, formal, digitally assisted jobs. Even in the pandemic, people keep talking about, technology taking away jobs. How every industry, every company has used technology, even in our own Taj, to provide the food service, they launched the Cumin app. It is a digital intervention, but at the end of the day, you need the cook, you need the people to deliver. So nobody lost jobs. In fact, it helped to keep the people in the jobs.
So if I just extend what you've just said, to dealing with the problem, there is the question of access, for example. Now, obviously, it's tough to use digital means to solve something like how do I have access to a hospital bed or an oxygen cylinder. Those are physical things that must be done. But access to basic information, what do I need to do if I have COVID? When should I get dexamethasone or not get dexamethasone? When do I need to go to a hospital? Some of these are information-related issues, which you don't necessarily have to go and get an appointment with a top doctor to try and get that appointment and get the answers to these questions. Some of it can be done at scale and distributed at scale using technology and using digital means.
Also the point you said about how do I get a bed? I mean, imagine a platform where we have all this information, where we know the status of every hospital, every bed, status of what is the oxygen required, where the oxygen is produced, what are the tankers we have. We just don't have it online. If it is a one single platform, it is no big deal. People can go and look up. Where is it that I can get? Where is it that I cannot get? It's not only about the number of beds. It is how many beds are occupied by severe patients, etc. See, currently, all these things are not an online platform. When I say a digital situation, all of this is in platforms.
And then that solves the problem because they don't have to physically keep going. I mean, people try and do it, but to some extent, I'm almost seeing citizen curated, lists coming up with these hospital beds are available, these are not there. The government's also tried to do it, but it doesn't always work, terribly effectively. To your point about jobs and the impact that's going to be on jobs and skilling, that's obviously not something that can be done in a crisis. But I was just wondering, as lockdowns start to happen, and it's possible. I mean, I know everyone's very reluctant to have lockdowns, but let's face it, it's a very real possibility given how bad the situation is. Is there any immediate technological or digital solution that we don't have the same example that we saw last year of migrants and people having to walk? And we certainly don't want to ever go through those days again.
See, to my mind, I think the immediate things that we can do during this period is to do the tracing even now, and the vaccination. How do you track the supply of vaccines? See, anything that needs to be done to solve the COVID crisis in a public health point of view, whatever is digitally available, whatever additionally we have to build in a quick and dirty manner, we can do that. But otherwise, to make a technological intervention in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it's not going to happen. So whatever we have to immediately do, additionally, based on what we have the Arogya Setu and what other functionality we can build to take care of the problems that we are facing in a war footing, we can do that. But I think from a next 6 months, 12 months, 1 year, 2 year point of view, I think we've got to be going back to really implementing these with a well thought out plan so that we can handle these kind of situations.
Right. Sanjiv, I'm going to shift to some of the other sectors also and ask about other questions and then take questions from the audience as well. But before I do that, if I could just ask you one last question on the pandemic specifically, which is when it comes to the biggest challenge right now is, so there's vaccines are there, vaccines will save lives, but for the vaccines to break India's second wave and to break the tsunami, you probably need to get to the levels that, let's say, the UK or the US are, which is approximately 50 to 60% of people have got a dose, a vaccine dose, roughly around those levels. 50 vaccine doses per 100 people, let's just call it that. Now, to get to that level in India, you need 400, 500, 600 million vaccine doses. To some extent, it's a logistic question, it's a supply question, it's a manufacturing question. How do you get vaccines into so many people's arms? And how do you scale up production to get to that level where you can do 200, 300, 400 million vaccine doses in a month? If you were given that task and said, how do you do it? How would you do it? Because, I mean, look at the range of businesses that you manage. I can think of very few people who would be able to manage that task better. How would you do it? How would you get to that many doses?
I think it's a tough question to answer because I don't have all the data. But the point is that we need to get as many different vaccines licenses as possible, and then we're going to scale up. Even if you have to replicate multiple factories, we have got to do that. We have to really take this on our footing, and whatever investments necessary to be able to do it in the next 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks time to be able to scale up the vaccine production is something that we have to do. And with that goal in mind, we've got to work the plan. I don't have a a plan that I can share with you, but I'm pretty sure that that is the current thinking. But how do we get a plan to be able to mass produce? I think if I know, I think we would have done what, 10 crore people now?
A little more than that, but we're producing approximately, as of today, 70 million doses in a month, which is way lower than what it should be. It'll be 100, 150 by next month, but not enough to break the wave of this. People are going to die. So what you seem to be saying is replicate those factories. So maybe give the licenses or license the licenses to other companies, to the Tata Group, to others, and saying, just produce more because it's an emergency.
I think we need to figure out how do we replicate so that we mass produce. And so that we are able to meet the requirement, because this is something that is needed to be done. It's an urgent situation.
Right. Well, you did say that the pandemic has got two aspects to it, right? In addition to, obviously, we know the devastation and the damage it's causing. But as you said, in some businesses, things are looking slightly different, because as you said, everyone now believes in digital. So anything which is a digital business is actually seen a lot of traction in the last 1 year, or sustainable businesses or health, as you said. If you look at your group and the examples that you're facing, where are the places where you think there's going to be a real time to come back? And which are the other areas? So like the services sector, hotels, you've got hotels in your group, you've got automobiles in the group, you've got steel in the group. So which are the sort of companies in the group that you would be worrying about, and which ones are you saying may actually get wind under their wings in the next few
I think months? The main area where from our parochially, the main two industries which will suffer, airlines will take time to come back, because the travel is not going to come back in a hurry. Business travel is definitely not going to come back in a hurry. So airline industry of all industries will take a longer recovery cycle. And hotels is another industry which has to carefully navigate this period. And, they are frontline, they are needed. They have the toughest job at this point in time. But at the same time, their recovery is going to be longer, because the business guests are not going to come.
So with those words about airlines, I'm almost tempted to ask you whether you're regretting or still proceeding or thinking about Air India, but you don't have to answer that right now if you don't want to.
I mean, this is not a business interview, but I'll tell you, when you run a business, you have to look at each opportunity in the context of where you are, and then you make those calls, and we will see. We are.
It's okay. I'm not going to ask you too many Tata-related questions, not on this platform. Dr. Saurav Singh is asking that industries like IT, education, sales, etc., can be managed in a lockdown situation, as work from home is possible here. But what is your opinion regarding manufacturing and constructing industries? Because manufacturing, construction areas like that, because I think his point, which is correct, is you can't do work from home and you don't necessarily have digital solutions to those areas.
I think on okay, let me put it this way. there are digital solutions. Digital solutions do not mean work from home. Digital is all about humans and technology working together hand in hand. Technology to help people to perform better. That's the whole concept. But I agree that manufacturing and construction industries will suffer in a lockdown situation. And if we go on a lockdown, serious lockdown, and if these industries don't function, we'll hurt the economy big time. And when we hurt the economy big time, we will hurt a section of laborers big time. Their livelihoods will suffer, which we saw it last year. So it is that's why I keep saying that it is not either or. You can't just say that if the virus is not tackled and we're going to have a full lockdown, then you have a different set of problems. So this has to be very carefully managed. It has to be, to some extent, it has to be managed in micro segments, I feel. There'll be packets where if we anticipate there is going to be an uprise, at least now we know in Mumbai, Delhi situation, from there we are beginning to see, we should be anticipating where it is likely to be. The best thing that we can do is to have predictive analytics. You asked me, what can we do better in the lockdown situation for the next month? I think the most important thing is to get into predictive analytics so that we know where the cases are going to rise next week. And we should be having a very concerted plan to be able to handle those segments. It is not a nationwide one solution fits all.
Right. One question from Ganesh Natarajan. Nothing succeeds like access. And we have had a real problem with last mile connectivity in India, information asymmetry. Now that's obviously been a key issue that people have confronted even during the last 1 year. It's for a certain set of industries and for a certain set of people. It's all very well to say, okay, work from home, you don't have to do it, and things are fine. Digital businesses, if you can work from home, you've got good internet, there's no problem. But just as we were saying, construction and manufacturing industries have a problem. What happens to all the people who don't have access to good digital? Is that something which you think would become worse?
Well, there are two things. Work from home is not a solution forever. Let's be very clear. No industry can work completely from home. We have to strike a balance. Business is all about building relationships between employees and customers, with people at large. So we have to get back to some kind of a balance. No industry will go 100% work from home or a very high percentage of work from home. That is not viable. You need to renew relationships. You need to build new ones. That's one. Second one is in terms of what we are advocating digitally is to create that connectivity. What we are 100% advocating is that we need to have, the last man should have access to network, cloud, and AI and other technologies. And that is the investment that we need to be making. The last person in this country should have that access. And it should have the same kind of access like everyone else. Then we can address these problems most effectively.
Right. Vimal Bhatt says, is the Indian youth really ready for the digital nation in the next decade? And if I could just add a follow-up question, and coming back to something that you started with, where you said everybody believes in digital. Now, to some extent, that is correct. In the last 1 year, for example, and people like me who spent some years now telling everyone television is dying and TV news is dying and everything's going to become digital, nobody would believe it. And in the last 1 year, suddenly everybody believes it. So the question here, are people ready to accept that technology and digital nation and this is the way the future is going to be? What is your take? Are people ready or not ready? Or has the last convinced all the cynics?
See, at the end of the day, nothing gets done just because somebody gives a hypothesis. If you look at our book, the stories that we have written in every walk of life, whether it is the healthcare example in Assam, the taxi driver who pretty much turned to be a medical assistant, or any of the other examples, the young girl in Maharashtra, or the policewoman in Punjab, every one of those examples clearly demonstrate how transformation can happen if only we enable. Take a small and medium sector. See, India is a land of entrepreneurs. There are so many people who have got entrepreneurial ambition. And the biggest success is going to come from the SME sector. You know that, I know that. But it is very hard for an MSME to turn an entrepreneur. It's very easy in Bangalore to say that there is a startup ecosystem, I can be a startup. But take a tailor, for example, and he wants to become an entrepreneur. And it's not going to be easy because he has to learn how to fill forms, how to get licenses, how to understand the tax structure. He has to understand payroll. He has to understand GST. Then he has to get financing, which is very difficult to do because he doesn't have anything in any track record. So we need a platform approach. We need a platform. If you are able to have a platform by which all these problems can be solved, the platform which can take care of all these things which the person doesn't have to do, because we are asking the person to do everything other than the actual skill with which he wants to build his business or her business. So when I say digital, when I say digital, I do not mean it is about doing a Zoom call. It is not about building an app. When I say digital, it is about bringing the technology, the platforms for the benefit of the person in order to pursue his or her ambition. I tell you, one single SME platform, digital platform, which can solve all these problems, will create entrepreneurial clusters, digital clusters as we call it in the book. It need not be only in Bangalore for IT startups. Why can't it be for textile? Why can't it be for something else? And that is what we need to do. Then we will really spur entrepreneurship. Then each person will create jobs. And I will tell you that is the way jobs will get created. 100 million jobs are not going to come from corporates. Let's be clear.
Yeah. People have to have the ability to do it yourself. That ties in, I guess, to education. Here's a question coming in from Himanshu Agarwal. Should technology not be used to identify super spreaders using AI? But, yes. Maybe, frankly, I'm not even sure whether you need artificial intelligence to identify super spreaders. But frankly, if you ask me, I think artificial intelligence will find it tough to deal with natural stupidity in some of the cases that we are seeing. But the use of AI for identifying super spreaders, and as another question, the use of AI in the logistics around vaccines, medicines, oxygen.
See, that's what I was saying. If you have a platform which links the beds, patients, oxygen, tankers, all these things in a single platform, then it will be handy, but you don't have it today.
Right.
And to some extent, there is technology in the Arogya Setu app to track super spreaders. And I'm pretty sure that they have access to this data. Every state government has got this access to this data.
Yes, well, let's see the user. Sometimes you can just trust your eyes also and see what's happening. I just want to shift to education because we've spoken a fair amount about healthcare, education. These are some of the themes that keep coming up as the really important things to drive India forward and in a sustainable manner. You've spoken about skilling as well, but what is your sense on education and the application of digital to areas like education, and how can that be used to really drive change going forward? And to enhance productivity.
Again, the pandemic has brought it so vividly. You look at the number of things that happened in education, how people adapted to the extreme level of digital education. Everybody went on to online platforms, whether it is Google Cloud based or Zoom based or Teams based or whatever it is. And this is the extreme level. But in digital, what we say is that there is a digital intervention required so that we gainfully use teachers. Teachers have to do only certain things. Teachers don't have to do everything. Entire administrative process can be taken over by technology. Assessment can be taken over by technology. Grading can be taken over by technology. There are so many things that the teacher does can be freed up from the teachers so that they can focus on the job of teaching. Content, best content can be made available to everybody. It can be standardized. Standardized for the better. Every best content will be available to all kids in all languages across the nation. And we can create collaboration platforms. Already some of it came into fore during the last 1 year. Collaboration platform between teachers, collaboration platform between students, teachers across different schools, students across different schools. I'm telling you, the power of bringing digital education is just enormous. It will not only provide access, it will create jobs, because many of these things will be intermediate jobs. These are not teaching jobs, but these are jobs that will come in making technology work for all the tasks that the teachers don't have to do.
Right.
And I think this is the way to go.
Right. Well, before we run out of time, I just wanted to ask you, the big trends you see going forward, because right now I think there's so much gloom and doom and we're dealing with the immediate crisis. But if you could look out 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, where do you see us heading? What are the big trends that you're seeing going forward?
I think the trend for the world for the next decade, to my mind and beyond, number one is acceleration of digital. When I say digital, I don't mean digital businesses like IT and technology. I mean every business, whether it's industrial, construction, auto, steel, whatever be the business you are in, how the digital adoption and how it can leverage the data that business wants, has access to, and adoption of that to give the better products and services, better experience for customers. That is one trend. Second one is every business will move to a sustainable future, like electric vehicles in automotive, like renewable energy in power sector. But there are green steel, there are other things. There are many, many things in each industry. So sustainability will be a big investment going forward. Third, public health, wellness, and safety will be a priority. There will be a lot of money that will go in there, and there will be a lot of innovation that will happen there, including innovation in terms of new solutions for not only COVID-19, for every other possible ailment. Then the fourth one is the global supply chains have to become resilient. Supply chains will become from just in case, from just in time to just in case. So there will be a distribution of the supply chain, still integrated, but that will become an absolute necessary. That will create lots of opportunities in India, and investments will certainly go in there. I think these are some of the trends that I would like to highlight going forward.
So build resilience, and some of these are big trends. And when you talk about digital, just one last quick question. When you are saying it's not just the IT and the other businesses that you're looking at, you seem to be saying every single business has to look at itself and say, either you're going to be digital 5 years from now, or else you're not going to be.
Yeah, you will have to create platforms. I'm just saying, for example, MSME. How do you bring digital to build the platforms that will solve the problem of a particular sector? You talk about public health care. How do you solve public health care? It is not, we can't go on a hospital building spree. That's not going to solve. But how do you create the platforms which will leverage the knowledge, data of not only patients, about the resources that is available? So every segment, when I say digital, I do not mean building an app or building a technology company. I am saying, how do you bring a platform approach using the digital tools? Technology by itself will mean nothing unless or otherwise the business can visualize the use of the technology. Well, it's become very powerful. Now AI is powerful, cloud is powerful. You can create platforms to solve some of the big problems. And I think whether it is healthcare, whether it is education, or any of the public infrastructure and societal challenges we have, or building solutions and transforming businesses in which are existing. I don't want to call it as old age businesses. Every business will become a new age business if you bring a platform-centric approach.
All right. I think that's really been fascinating, and we've got a large number of insights from you, sir. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to leave it there for the moment and toss it back to the AIMA team.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of a very insightful. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to an end of a very insightful discussion on bridging the technology divide in the country. Thank you so much, Mr. Chandra and Mr. Chandrasekhar. We shall start our next session in just another 5 minutes. Please do stay with us. Thank you.
A warm welcome to all of you for Plenary Session 3, a panel discussion with the next generation. The COVID crisis has shown the resilience of family businesses, but the simultaneous churn in the business environment has also put pressure on those to recognize and reorient. In this session, let's hear from the next generation of business families as to how they can transform and strengthen their legacies. In a session very aptly named Gen Next Transferring Legacies, I'm pleased to welcome on the virtual stage Mr. C.K. Ranganathan, Senior Vice President AIMA and Chairman and Managing Director Kevin Care Private Limited, Mr. Sanjiv Goenka, Vice Chairman CESC Limited, Ms. Shefali Munjal, Executive Director Hero Enterprise, Mr. Alok Kirloskar, Managing Director SPP Pumps Limited, and Mr. Pranjal Sharma, Economic Analyst, Advisor and Writer, and author India in Automated, and also the moderator of this session. May I now request Mr. Ranganathan to introduce the session.
Thanks, Rekha. Good evening, all. It's indeed a great pleasure to introduce this session. The session is on Next Gen Transforming Legacies. I'm very happy to introduce you the moderator, Mr. Pranjal Sharma. He's an economic analyst, advisor and writer, and author of India Automated. He writes several books, and he's mostly on the kind of technology, how it should be ready. I think that's very, very important. And the books are available in Amazon and hot selling. Those who are not read it, I would definitely urge you, just be a definite eye opener as to how India is going to unfold and how world is already folding, and we should be prepared to. So with that note, I think I'm very happy to have three scions of the next family business. I'm very happy to introduce Sanjiv Goenka, Vice Chairman, CESC Limited, Ms. Shefali Munjal, Executive Director, Hero Enterprise, Ms. Alok Kirloskar, Managing Director, SPP Pumps Limited. So this is a very interesting session. I would like to give just an intro to this session. Is family businesses have generally fared better than the public-owned companies during the COVID crisis. You all know that they have done exceedingly well. Their conservatism with cash, speed of decision-making, and personal ties with stakeholders have allowed them to withstand disruption. While many other companies did, but family-owned companies seem to have done much, much better. However, the next generation of family business leaders are now faced with unprecedented challenges because of the coming disruption from the changes in technologies, business models, trade regimes, policies, and regulations. They have to reconcile to the transient nature of modern companies and the demand of durability in a family organization. The next generation has to transform its legacy in order to have a legacy to pass on to the following generation. Therefore, I think if we can answer some of the questions, what are the unique challenges and opportunities for the next family business leaders? I would put it across something. It is a very urgent, and this thing is the fourth industrial revolution. Mr. Pranjal is a kind of the thing. He authored books on that. It will be very interesting to see that how the next gen is ready for this kind of a fourth industrial revolution. And another thing, if you look at family businesses, are historically person-driven. It is built by the first generation entrepreneurs, mostly person-driven. How well the process-driven culture has been set, how this is going to be far more, because process only can take it very comfortability to hand over it to the next generation. The next thing I would say that how can families ensure that next generation has the appetite and the ability to transform the legacy business? So a lot of people, when they go abroad and say, no, I'm not coming, I'm happy. He's a happy-go-lucky guy kind of a this thing syndrome, having a lot of money and wealth. The responsibility is also huge. With a lot of kind of this thing, the responsibility is much higher. So wanting to take life easy is also, we see parallelly a lot of people not interested in family business and wanting to enjoy business, wanting to enjoy life. So that I think is how the kind of the thing, what should the family business do to make them far more interested and take up the mantle. The third one, I would say that should the scion build a new generation businesses on their own before turning to revolutionize the family business? Quickly, I think it's a very important question. I can talk about my experience. I have 3 children. All the 3, I said, you have to start something on your own before coming into my business. So I told them very limited business, more efforts based, and experience is very, very important. I told them one thing very common, that I wish you fail. And if you succeed, I'm happy. But if you fail, that will be a biggest teacher, because you require to face failure earlier. And I'm very happy to say they have all struggled. They had their own ways of struggle, and they have come out much more successful. But it took over 5 years' time. They have found their own feet. They have understood business. The learning is enormous. I don't think had they joined my business, they would have got such kind of talent. With that note, I hand it over to Mr. Pranjal Sharma. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ranganathan. That's really well. Thank you. That's very well articulated, especially from your own personal perspective of how you led your children to run the business. I think the key points you've said are critical. I don't want to dwell on that, but I think the real challenge is that the advantage family businesses have is that they can perhaps take stronger and deeper decisions about the entire group than perhaps a professional company can, because they have to go through far more focus on quarterly numbers rather than looking at a 10 or a 25-year perspective. So with that, let me bring in the 3 new generation business science, because the growth of their groups now depends on their shoulders. And COVID is actually a moment from where it's a turning point from where the entire way that businesses are run is going to shift. So while you mentioned, Mr. Ranganathan, about the 4th industrial revolution, add the element of COVID, where business models have been destroyed in a matter of months, not years. What happens next? So Shashwat, in your view, from electricity to consumer products to retail to music even, how do you see the challenges for the group? Do you see that you have to now be in a difficult situation of letting go of certain industries and certain businesses and then focus on new ones? How do you see the whole vision playing out?
Sure. Thank you so much, Pranjal, and thanks so much, Mr. Ranganathan, for the warm introduction. So, when I look at the last 12 months, I think it's been nothing short of a roller coaster ride, right? All of that B-school education, all of the experience you can draw from all the senior people within the group and elsewhere as well. None of that served as any kind of a blueprint when it came to, navigating the COVID pandemic, right? It's something that just came out of nowhere, right? And took everyone by surprise. And none of our business models were catered towards it. So I think, one of the key lessons that I have learned over this period is this whole lesson around resilience, right? In terms of doing what you're doing, understanding, specific to retail, understanding the core consumer need and catering to that. And sometimes some things are done with a long-term view and the return will come subsequently, right? So I think, and the other very important thing that I kind of learned, and I think that is what I really take with me when we look at the next, like you said, the next 5, 10, 15 years, is this whole lesson around agility, right? How quickly can you change what you had in mind, what blueprint you had set for the business, what your expectations and goals were with the changing scenario of not just the economy and the world, but the changing consumer as well, right? And I think so very briefly, agility, resilience, I think are the 2 things that I believe will be very important as we look forward and look to go ahead really.
Thanks, Shashwat. Shefali, the question is also about COVID has brought everybody to the same level. And as Shashwat mentioned, all the experience of the senior generation of 30, 40 years perhaps does not apply anymore. And you have to think completely new in what's going to happen in a post-COVID world. Do you think, Shefali, that new generation leaders like you are better placed to manage the post-COVID world?
Thanks, Pranjal, for the introduction and a warm welcome to everybody else on the panel. Absolutely. The COVID year has been a massive leveler. It has taught us a lot of lessons. And I agree with Shashwat that resilience and agility is one of the two of the most important things that we have learned. But what COVID also has done is given us all an opportunity to reflect. We've all had experiences where we've had to close offices or businesses ranging from manufacturing to online businesses to point of sale businesses across the country. Different parts of the country have got affected at different parts of time, things like that. Different businesses in different parts of the world. We've not been able to travel abroad to manage our businesses abroad either. So it's been a great leveler, and it's given us a lot of time to reflect. Now, coming to your question, Pranjal, there is definitely merit and value in the experience that the older generation, as well as, older employees in the organization bring to us. There's definitely a lot of merit and experience and valuable information that they bring to us in terms of how to build a brand, how to retain brand value, how to retain brand loyalty, how to keep the company together, how to keep the culture of the company together. But as the new generation, we have to look at disruption not as anything always negative. We have to look at it as this is just another step in the phase where markets are changing, and we have to change along with the changes that come towards us. It's just that the changes have come towards us at a breakneck speed, and we've had to adapt to them with very varied responses in different industries. For example, in the manufacturing sector, which I have some interests in, we've had to respond to that with, working out how do we prevent COVID in the factory environment. On the point of sale business across the country, we've had to see which markets can we keep open when, and how do we digitize fast enough so that we don't have to have a face-to-face interaction necessarily for everything. On other sides of the consulting business, we've seen a hit where trainers, for example, if you're in the training business, like which one of the businesses that I'm in is the training business, we can't actually send trainers to offices and factories anymore because they're shut. So how do we digitize fast enough so that we can get everybody online? So it's been a great leveler, but it's also been a great opportunity to learn and see how fast is it that we can react. How fast is it? And that is the real value I think Gen Next can bring to this. Because one, we've got education, we've got experience, we've got the blessings and the support of the elders in our families in terms of professionals who've been there for 20, 30, 40 years, as you mentioned, or we've got, the guidance of older family members, we've got the experience of, all of their joint experience together. But what we have really had to do is move very, very fast.
Thanks, Shefali. Alok, coming to you, investing in new technology is a difficult decision because it also means you have to put away whatever you have invested in previous years. So what do you do with legacy technology and how do you bring in new technology? And that transition is very difficult for large enterprises which are running different business models across different geographies and different verticals. How have you managed this, Alok, in the Kirloskar Brothers group, including the company that you run?
Thank you, Mr. Ranganathan, for the initial introduction. And Pranjal, to answer your question, I would say that, the change and the challenges we're talking about have been in the making possibly for the last decade. And the definition of a product has been changing over the last decades, especially for us in manufacturing. You see it a lot more now in the automotive industry. But just to give you an example, Rolls-Royce moved to the concept of power by the hour for their jet engines more than a decade ago, where they would sell the engines for not very much money, but make money every time you're using the aircraft, as an example. Netflix, if you look at the other example, has moved out of DVD sales into renting DVDs and finally into the online presence on a subscription basis as you see it today. And we find the change in our industry as well. As you possibly know, we've discussed this before, knowledge management has been very important to us. As an old company, we lose, whenever we lose people who've been with us for a long time with a lot of knowledge, we feel that we are losing, information and our ability to make changes in the business very quickly, because there are things like, warranty, different kinds of things that they have learned that are in their heads, which may not necessarily be owned by the company. I don't know if you want to call it IP or, whatever you want to call it, but it's information like that needs to be documented. And so, all these things, what is a product, what are employees supposed to be doing now, because the kind of employees you're recruiting are different. Back in the day, in the license Raj, the role of employees was very different from what the role of employees is today. Today we want people who will make changes, who are going to be thinking to lead the company forward, who are taking initiatives and driving the company themselves, with, of course, interaction with the people you're calling promoters today in companies, and guidance and ideas and idea sharing with promoters. But I would say that a lot of these people have to move forward themselves. And today you need technologies that support all these things together, things, whether it's AI, whether it's 3D printing, whether it's managing KPIs for companies, for all your employees around, across your companies, and connecting them to your vision and mission statements. Because people today have the requirement to want to understand what is their contribution to the company. And if they're not able to see that very visibly, they get demotivated. So I think these technologies are important. Yes, they're technologies that companies invested in the past, and it's not that they're obsolete. They're operating at a lower level. Whether you're talking about CNC machines, you're talking about industry 3.0. Of course, there's industry 4.0, but that's just sensors on top of what you already had. So I don't think that something's been phased out or something's obsolete or something's written off. But I do believe that there is a transition to the next generation of products, which may not be a product as we are selling to someone else today. It could be as a subscription, and a different way of managing people, because it's changed completely, and how you interact with people has changed completely. For me, I think being in the US and managing companies in the US and in the UK has helped me understand that a lot more, and helped me understand what sort of systems need to be brought into the companies in India to sort of have that same level of collaboration and have that same level of accountability along with the authority. I hope that answers the question you are asking me.
Look, it explains a lot, and I think the focus that your company and the group has had on technologies is at a global world-class level, and I think that's also making sure that the group is ready for changes at a much faster pace, and that's what Shefali referred to as well. But coming to you, Shashwat, you also represent a group which has been there for generations. Now, typically, once a business model is set in any vertical or industry, it sort of stays there, or it used to stay there for 15 years, 20 years, perhaps, at a minimum of 10 years. Today, we are looking at a situation where a business model needs to disrupt itself in 3 years, at least, maybe in 2 years. And the new emergence of such business model means that business promoters, family owners have to be equally agile, and agile also means taking very difficult decisions, which means to say, I'm going to shut down this and I'm going to start something completely new, because this is not going to work. It may be working at 50%, but if I don't end it now, I will not be able to move to the new one. Are there examples in your experience where you had to take these tough decisions, where you realize that being on top of new emerging business models is perhaps a challenge which the previous generations never faced?
So, I mean, yes, you need to be on top of these kind of situations, Pranjal, but I disagree with you. I think every generation that's come before me has faced it as well, right? When I see examples from my grandfather, from my father, and when you see how the group has grown, it's been a combination of growing greenfield businesses as well as a few brownfield ventures that we acquired, and letting go of some businesses that didn't work, right? So in the 90s, we used to have this Cellucom business called RPG-Cellucom, right? Which didn't work and did not work for the model we had. So we had to let go of it. Similarly, much earlier, we used to have a tire company, Dunlop as well, which did not work at that point in time. So you have to let go of it, right? Similar things have happened across even now. And say, when I look at my experience, I've not really faced it at a company level yet, but there have been departments that we've had to say, okay, this particular strategy or this particular function that this department was supposed to serve is not serving anymore. We need to move on with it. Okay, what was invested, sunk cost, move on, right? And they have been difficult. They have been tough calls. They've been areas, say, that we've been passionate about and we've always believed will work and help the business proactively. But if they haven't served their purpose, you have to move on, and you have to, and this is the whole thing around being agile, right? It's not about making decisions quick and changing your decisions quickly, but really being able to understand what gives you that long-term shareholder value and moving on from that.
True, Shashwat. But it also means, and I'll ask Shefali for this, sometimes companies need to completely let go of what their core was. And there are several examples globally. IBM, for example, is a good a company which used to be a laptop provider to a services provider, right? So Shefali, do you see those kind of attitudes becoming far more central, where business leaders and new generation will have to completely think out of the box and say, well, my group may have been known for A, B, C, D, but I'm going to lead it to X, Y, Z?
Yes, absolutely. I think you have to be one step ahead of the disruption. And the disruption now is coming at a breakneck speed. Whether it's a digital company that's going to outsell you or on a consumer product that you traditionally sold on points of sales or through dealerships, or whether it's a digital company or a combination tech startup which does training better than you, you have to be one step ahead of the disruption. So there are 4 choices. 1, you can become part of the disruption. Secondly, you can undermine the disruption. Thirdly, you can contain the disruption, or you can fourthly exit altogether. But I don't think exiting altogether a legacy business which has a brand, which has value, which has goodwill is a very sensible idea in the long term. So we have to find one of the 3 first initial responses, which is either to undermine it, to contain it, or to get one step ahead of it. And that can only happen when we bring in a lot of good talent and good resources into our businesses. There is, as I said, a lot of value and a lot of learning that comes with the elder generation. But as education is available now, we see a lot more MBAs, we see a lot more overseas educated, guys coming into the scene. I do feel that if you hire the right kind of talent, we can overcome a lot of these challenges, which perhaps an older generation may take a longer time to do than we would. I hope that answers it.
Yes, it does. It does. Alok, I think it also ties in with what you were saying. And I think in some ways, all 3 of you have the same level of, maturity and forward-looking ideas about what the group means. But Alok, you did refer to the teams as well, making the transitions of the teams. But today, even mid-level companies have a global perspective, right? So at one level, you're talking about the 4th industrial revolution. Second, we're talking about the change in COVID-led business models. And third, we're talking about a global perspective, which starts even with the smallest company in the group. Now, how do you plan for all these things when you look at growth for the next 3 years? Now, again, sooner or later, you will have the entire weight of the group on your shoulders, Alok. So does that also put too much pressure on the next gen, or do you think you are ready for it and the next gen actually will be able to manage faster and better the whole concept of agility and being able to take tough decisions?
Pranjal, I think that really depends on how the next generation is inducted into the business. And for me, I'll give you my own example. I mean, my father sort of inducted us, both me and my sister, not at the top end of the business, but at the bottom end of the business, and that really allowed us to understand the business, meet customers, meet our own employees, and very often feel the pain along with them, right? And while you could feel the pain, you always knew that since you always have the option of changing that, what would you change, right? And very often the answer is the decision or the action is not as simple as it seems, because there are other complications. Because of course, when you're interacting with people, it's a different employees that you're working with at that point in time. They only see it from their department or their division point of view, and not necessarily as a company point of view. And while you are in their department working with them, you still have that view of the whole company. And it helps you understand, what, if you have to make a change, how do you make that change that, works for the whole company, not just for a division or a department. And I think definitely feeling that pain is important, because you need to feel that pain, you need to feel desperation, you need to have that sinking feeling, and then that makes you run a little faster. So I would say that's definitely important. And the global question that you asked me, yes, every company has aspirations to be global, but I don't think that means every company needs to be global. I think at the end of the day, a company needs to deliver return to its shareholders, and one needs to figure out that, are you better suited being in India and delivering better returns, or is your business so international that you need to have operations in different countries because maybe you depend on understanding where the technology is moving, and there may be Western countries that are sort of moving technology, and you having a presence there allows you to be ahead of the curve because you know where the technology is moving towards. Or it could be because you want to be based in different countries to hedge your risks. Because I think now it's becoming more and more expensive to be based in different countries overseas, especially because of various trade barriers. I think more and more countries want local content. And at one time you could make in India and just export. And that was a great model. But I think today, different countries, the US included, are putting in all sorts of local value addition requirements. And so that there's a change now in how you're going to sort of operate, because you need to have a local presence, which means you need to have local people, and you need to be able to understand, interact, manage all those different cultures. So I think it's going to be a different transition, and it's going to be more difficult than just being an export-oriented company going forwards.
True, but I think all three of you and most of the new generation is far more global today in its culture, in its outlook, and its experiences than previously. But now let me ask a personal question to all three of you. And I'm really building on a very brilliant opening that Mr. Ranganathan gave to me. So I'm going to ask you, Shashwat, Shefali, and Alok, about the first key challenge that you faced, which was probably given to you by your parents or the earlier generation, to earn your spurs, to be able to earn the right to be growing in the company and take leadership position. So if you can share a story, each of you, it will be wonderful, because it'll be great learning for all of us as well, and the audience who's listening in. So Shashwat, if you can share a story of how you cracked one of your first or the toughest nut that you had.
Sure. So contrary to say how Alok's induction in the business was, right? Mine was very different. It was trial by fire, thrown into the deep end, leading that company, not knowing anything about Indian retail, not knowing anything about or much about the Indian consumer beyond being one myself.
So you'll have to start again. You'll have to start, Shashwat, in sense, which company, when was it, how did it happen?
Sorry. Yeah, cool. So talking about Spencer's Retail, right? Which is the retail company running hypermarkets and supermarkets across the country. So I didn't really start down below in the ranks. I got an exposure across departments, and then I was thrown right into the deep end, where you were heading this. You had a lot of senior people who had been working with the group and with the company for years, who were now suddenly reporting into you. Also, obviously, in their heads, figuring out what is this 22-year-old going to be doing here? Why are we reporting into him? What value can he possibly add? He stayed out of B school, no experience, nothing, right? So I think my first challenge, and it's not really a business challenge, but it was more a challenge in terms of how I dealt with people, was really how do you try and, establish is the wrong word, but how do you try and get your point across to a bunch of people who've been doing this forever, who know retail? They are the experienced people in retail. How do you get your point across to them without, it being the fact that, okay, just because you are their boss, or because you are a promoter, or just because you have a wacky idea out there that nobody else has, right? And I think that was my biggest challenge, is sitting in that boardroom, trying to work with all of these senior leaders, trying to figure how to put my point across. And I think the one thing that helped me with, actually, and that really worked and works for me till day today, is really this whole thing around, don't make a point for the sake of making it. Use logic and make that point. And your point is not always the right point. There could be an alternative logic which somebody else may have. Work it out, debate it out, and do what's best ultimately for the business and the shareholder, right? And I think that's the principle I've followed through and through. And I think that's really what kind of helped me break that initial barrier with them, where they realize that I'm as much part of the team as they are. I'm not there to reprimand them, but to work with them. And jointly, all of us are there to work towards the same end goal, right? So.
I can imagine how difficult it could have been for you as a 20-year-old, 22-year-old to be telling people, well, how about looking at it this way? It's a classic transition challenge. Shefali, what about you?
As Mr. Ranganathan said in his opening statement, he wants his children to fail first before they succeed. And very similar to Shashwat, I had a very similar experience. My dad literally said, here's the deep end, learn how to sink or swim. And I jumped in again, straight out of business school at the age of 22.
Which business was this?
I was in the software company. I started a software company called HeroSoft. And we basically were an SAP and a Microsoft Navision implementer. And the sector that we normally naturally chose was the automotive sector because we had business interests in that. We had experience. We could get domain knowledge from our own business conglomerate for the domain of the auto sector. So literally jumped into that and basically ran that business for about 5 or 6 years before we realized that we're losing talent very, very quickly because obviously this was a specific domain and we did win awards. We did good implementations, but we lost a lot of the talent. We were unable to also subsequently open offices overseas, which would have brought in the revenues to actually run the business. So that was my first learning. And that was, I think, we eventually had to close down that business and transform it into a consulting company to keep the legacy, carry the legacy forward. But that was a very, very major learning for me in my early to mid 20s and a real introduction into how the world of business works. So it wasn't all roses and a bed of roses, and I didn't really have a choice. But this is something I chose to do. I said, okay, I'm going to take the challenge. I'm going to take it head on. I'm going to roll with this. I'm going to see where it goes. How much appetite do I have for risk? How much appetite does the family have to invest in me for my risk that I want to take? And I have to say that it was a phenomenal experience because the family did support me. My dad did support me. And I grew and I learned a lot from the experience. Subsequently, the businesses that I set up after that, or the business that I got involved in running, I looked at it in a very different way. I looked at it from a perspective of what markets am I going to get? Where am I going to have my strengths? Where do my weaknesses lie? How do I prevent people from getting poached? How do I prevent getting disrupted by disruption? And that, I think, is a skill that has come in very handy now in a time of COVID, in a time of a pandemic where the entire world is going, haywire. How do you have the skills to cope with this without falling apart, without letting your businesses fall apart, and with keeping the legacy or the brand or however you name it? There are many labels for the same word: legacy, brand, goodwill. How do you keep it all together while everything is, in a situation where it might actually not stay together for very long? So I think the initial learnings that I had growing up in the family business and then on my own as an entrepreneur really helped me in shaping up, to deal with what we have to deal with today.
Thank you, Shefali. Alok, how was your trial by fire?
Trial by fire, I would say a lot of fire, if you ask me. After I was inducted in the Indian business, my father said, I think, being in the Indian business is one thing, but, given that we want to be international, I think you should go abroad. And so he sent me to the UK business. And the UK business has operations in the UK, Netherlands, South Africa, and Thailand, and America. And when we acquired these businesses, one of our focuses had been on the oil and gas segments, because in India, we were not particularly strong in this segment. And so all the businesses we acquired were pumps, of course, for the oil and gas segment. And when I went there, I realized that very soon after I got there, there was the collapse in the oil prices. As you remember, massive collapse in the oil prices, especially in 2014. And suddenly all the businesses that were acquired basically didn't have any business, right? Effectively, they were making huge losses. And it was, initially you're thinking, should I get into this market, that market? It was a struggle for many reasons. One was, the businesses were short of cash. So cash flow was a big issue. We had, a big issue in South Africa, because South Africa has things like broad-based black empowerment rules, where you need to have a business that's black empowered, which we were not, which also came into effect at the same time, unfortunately. And the third issue was, how do we restructure the businesses? Because, as you're aware, restructuring businesses in Europe is extremely expensive. And when you have no money, it's even more expensive. So I think that was something that we had to sort of work our way out of. And we really, it was difficult from a people point of view, because obviously you're very young. The people there are much, much older than you. The senior management is in their 50s, late 50s, and some of them even in their 60s. And so, changing that direction is not that easy. Your last name doesn't have the same sway that it does in India. So it was a huge task getting them on board, convincing them where you want to go, and ensuring they stop spending money, because one of the key things I learned was the real importance of cash flow, and conserving cash, but also understanding the movement of cash through your business. And that was really where I think for me personally, that was a huge area of growth. It also included recruiting new people, because some of the businesses never made money like a Thai business is an example back then. And so changing leadership, etc., in this difficult time, getting people on board, people from the competition on board, when your numbers really don't give them confidence that they should be with you. So I think that, and we got many people on board, and we were able to turn almost all those businesses around in the last couple of years, except for our Dutch business, which is still very difficult for us. So I would say it was very difficult, a lot of learning, a lot of hair loss also, but it helped me understand, really how to interact with, various cultures. How do you get the best out of them? And also understanding the system, the labor laws in Europe, because the labor laws in Europe are very difficult, but if you understand how they work, they can be made to work for you. So I think that, there are a lot of learnings over there. But I would say my number one learning was, managing cash in the business and keeping people motivated, because, finally people are the business. And if you have a very high attrition rate, or if you have demotivated people, your business is really going to nosedive. So, how do you keep people motivated when the numbers are bad? And how do you ensure your business doesn't run out of cash? Because that's the, like I think it was GM who said this, that, businesses don't go bankrupt because they make little less profit. They go bankrupt because they have no cash. And I think that's really the key learning over there.
That's well said. Look, I think cash, and when you talk about people, I also want to take a larger phrase for it, which is culture. I think cash and culture of the group really makes a huge difference. I've got a couple of questions from the audience. One is from Shantanu. He's talking about sustainability of non-digital companies, but it triggered a thought about the larger issue. One issue which you all as new generation have to face is about sustainability. Now, sustainability, or what is called ESG, environment, sustainability, governance, was not something which was top priority for previous generations. It has become in recent times, but for three of you and for the next generation of business leaders, it will be right in the center of everything that you do. In your view, is that complicating the growth path, or is it something that you think companies will have to take in stride? So I'll request all three of you to respond to that, especially with regard to how you are interpreting it and leading it for your group. Shashwat?
Fair. So I completely agree, Pranjal. I think going forward, this is going to become important, not just for consumers, especially for us as consumer-facing businesses, but even for our investors, right? And I think rightly so. And I think the one thing that the pandemic has taught us all is we cannot take the environment for granted, right? So I think it will become important. No, I don't think it will deter or slow growth. In fact, I think it will help growing in the right ways, right? And so therefore, I think it's something that I'm very proactive about. I'm very happy about. And I believe it can go a long way,
Shefali?
I'll answer a different part of the same question, whereas Shashwat has thrown light on the ecological sustainability of consumer businesses. I would rather talk about the risk compliance and governance aspect, which I think with the regulators coming in for almost all the consumer-facing and non-consumer-facing industries, I think it's very important today for businesses to be compliant. I think I personally put a lot of importance on risk and governance. And I think going forward, it will help overall industry and all new businesses emerging to have a level playing field to start with. So I think governance and sustainability goes hand in hand. And I'm pretty happy that, it's become a topic of discussion now, and it's a topic of importance.
Hello?
Pranjal, I think governance and ethics, are absolutely important for sustainability of the business. I mean, you'll have businesses that just grow like a meteor because of various things they do. But at the end of the day, I think it's about sustainability, and I think all the people you have right now on the panel are from very old businesses, who are known for their ethics, and that's really what has driven the sustainability of their businesses. I mean, they've not always been number one in the country, but they have always been around in the country and been of importance and made a difference in the country. And I think that's really that's the result of the fact that what ethics, what sustainable governance really means. That it allows the business to continue, and it connects to a very important point you made earlier about culture, because the culture of the business and the culture of the promoters extends into the culture of the people. And they notice everything that the promoters of the business are doing, and that extends into how they interact with the company, how they interact with our customers, how they interact with our suppliers. And if you want a sustainable business, I mean, for your own self as a business owner, I mean, you need to ensure that you have good governance over the long term. I would say environment is absolutely important for us, and it should be important for most businesses. I mean, some businesses, of course, could be hurt by becoming more and more environmentally friendly, because they were just in businesses that may not be environmentally friendly, and the transition to become an environmentally friendly business would mean change in their revenue profile, change in their margin profiles. But in the long term, I think yes, you have to be environmentally friendly. I mean, we have taken it on board, and we look at things like fish-friendly pumps as an example, or getting our energy from green sources. So I mean, it's absolutely important, and I mean that's the trend, because if we want to go, do not want to contribute towards global warming and all those kinds of things, we have to change the business we're in. And if we don't change, we'll probably be out of business, because today investors and even the general stakeholders want to be a part of companies and support companies that are environmentally friendly.
No, actually, if you look at it, the growth matrix and the influencing forces on new generation are far more complex in many ways than before. But Mr. Ranganathan, if I can come to you, I'll just take this. Mr. Ranganathan, after hearing all three of them, do you feel that the new generation is actually as capable as we know that they are? Are there certain thoughts that you have on what advice they should take on a idea that we may have missed out? Because if you look at the way they have approached issues, from environmental concern to technology, they're on the ball.
No, absolutely. I think I'm very happy to see that the next generation are far more equipped than otherwise normally expected. I think they are very well equipped to take on the business to the next level. And I think the current generation should be happy to hand over the mantle without delaying it too much, is what my viewpoint is. People can learn on the go.
Thank you. So, with this, I'd like to end the session and thank Shashwat, Shefali, Alok, and Mr. Ranganathan for sharing your experiences, your ideas, and your learnings. And I can say very confidently that with the representation of leaders like you, the future of corporate India is in very safe hands. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the speakers for a wonderful session. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't go away, because we start with a very exciting session, which is After Survival, the Rebuild, Business Leadership in 2021 and Beyond. Stay tuned. We'll start the session in another 5 minutes. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to the last session of the day, and this session brings to you two amazing CEOs who will debate on After Survival, the Rebuild, Business Leadership in 2021 and Beyond. The sweeping disruption of the past year has sapped most enterprises and tested India's business leadership. Let's ask some of the most successful CEOs as to how they and Indian business leaders are dealing with the challenge of disruption and rebuilding their organization for success in 2021 and beyond. I'm delighted to welcome on the virtual dais Mr. Sanjay Kirloskar, immediate past President AIMA and Chairman and Managing Director Kirloskar Brothers Limited, Mr. T.V. Narendran, CEO and Managing Director Tata Steel Limited, Mr. Sanjeev Puri, Chairman and Managing Director ITC Limited, and Ms. Nayanthara Rai, Chief of Delhi Bureau ET Now, who will moderate the session. With these words, may I now request Mr. Kirloskar to introduce the session and welcome our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Rekha. Mr. TV Narendran, CEO and Managing Director, Tata Steel Limited, Mr. Sanjiv Puri, Chairman and Managing Director, ITC Limited, Ms. Nayantara Rai, Chief of Delhi Bureau, ET Now. Ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to all for a relevant session in today's day and age on business leadership in 2021. We're privileged to have a panel of two distinguished leaders to discuss the immediate issue of recovering from the COVID shock and rebuilding for the future. Mr. Narendran, thank you for joining this panel. As a professional in the steel industry and the Tata Group, you've seen many transformations of business and economy over the past 3 decades. You've played a key role in the globalization of Tata Steel at the time the world became flat, and companies needed to build global capacities and competencies to survive. During the past year, you've dealt with the severe disruption of supply chain in your industry. It would be great to hear from you on how you have overcome this disruption to reconfigure your company for growth in the future. Thank you for joining us, and a warm welcome to you. Puri, it's a pleasure to have you, I think for the first time on the AIMA platform. As a key player in ITC's transformation from a tobacco company into an FMCG giant, and a driver of ITC's foray into technology, you know what it takes to lead an overhaul. The past year has been both a challenge and a boon for the FMCG companies as lockdowns disrupted production and distribution, but concentrated consumption at home. Your company has restructured its product portfolios and reinvented its operations. We would like you to tell us how emergency measures taken during this pandemic can be translated into a comprehensive business transformation. Thank you for joining us, and a warm welcome to you too. We're also delighted to have Ms. Nayantara Rai from ET Now. Ms. Rai, thank you for agreeing to moderate this discussion with these titans of Indian industry. A warm welcome to you as well. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a rough year for business leaders, and the new financial year promises to continue in the same manner. Keeping operations going despite revenue and liquidity challenges has tested most leaders. Some have done better than others, but even they have had to contend with continuing uncertainty. All have steered their organizations through fresh waves of COVID, random bouts of restrictions, swings in domestic and foreign policies, volatility in financial and commodity markets, and radical technology shifts. It's hard to settle on any assumptions to make even medium-term decisions, what with the new wave of COVID-19 that's bringing on a fresh set of lockdowns. Under the current circumstances, business leaders can only build organizational capabilities for greater flexibility and resilience. They need to invest in technology and skills to ensure business continuity under all conditions. They need to reorganize supply chains and distribution. They may also share risks and rewards by forging complementary partnerships. Importantly, in an extremely uncertain environment, business leaders must offer reliability. We are privileged to have two distinguished leaders from key sectors of the economy, and we can look forward to an exciting discussion. It's now my pleasure to invite Ms. Rai to take over and conduct this session. Thank you. Over to you, Nayantara.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining in. This is indeed a special conversation we're going to have with two titans of India Inc. Between them, they're responsible for direct and indirect employment of millions of people. There is still a lot of uncertainty. Thank you so much, Mr. TV Narendran and Mr. Sanjiv Puri, for agreeing to this conversation. We're supposed to be talking about leadership lessons learned in 2020 that we can carry forth in 2021. Mr. Puri, if I can begin with you. ITC directly employs 30,000 people. Indirectly, you're responsible for 6 million livelihoods. That's the number of people that rely on ITC for employment. Mr. Puri, I don't even want to know how 2020 was for you, but exactly a year later, we're pretty much where we were 365 days ago, but we have experience on our side. Given the kind of uncertainty, the raging pandemic, the second wave, which is looking far worse than the first wave, Mr. Puri, how do you draw strength every day to be the top boss of ITC? And if I could get your opening comments on how you're going to steer the company out of this crisis.
Thank you, Nandara. So I believe the pandemic last year was unexpected. I think many of us were caught off guard, and we had to respond on our feet. But I think there are tremendous lessons that all of us have got last year. And those lessons, of course, are going to come in good stead as we go forward. And if I reflect on what we learned last time and how this would steer us through, I think some of the most important lessons have first to do with people. I think as soon as this pandemic unfolded, the most important area that we gave attention to was how to comfort people, how to reach out to people with compassion and empathy, how to settle the anxieties, because ultimately it's the employees who will take care of the enterprise. So that was one. And as a large enterprise, and you alluded to our ecosystem where there are a lot more people dependent on our value chain. So we felt it is our own responsibility to reach out to the ecosystem in order that we could help them and support them in getting up their supply chains, their operations, and equally with the community, because they were people who needed help. They were people who were under distress. So that was the first step that we took. And having gone through that step, I think then it was time to now think about the future. How do we reboot? How do we survive? And how do we thrive in the future? And again, the first step was aligning and inspiring employees, getting them all aligned and getting all of them to understand and get the morale up so that we could deal with the challenges that lied ahead. As an organization, see, we are organized in a fashion that we believe gives us tremendous amount of agility. We have distributed manufacturing. Our supply chains actually deal with just in case. It's not designed for just in time, and that was deliberately so. And we have a distributed leadership. We have fair degree of empowerment, of course, with accountability. But when the pandemic unfolded, supply chains were disrupted. If you look at the market, there was demand destruction in certain sectors, and then there were sectors where there was a certain surge in requirements. For example, there was panic pantry loading, and also consumer consumption patterns shifted because out-of-home consumption stopped. So there was a surge. And then because of the hygiene issues, the hygiene and personal safety issues, there were new segments that were emerging. And there was a crying need in society to deal with all of this. So there was a lot to be done. And we realized that despite having an architecture that we thought was agile enough and resilient enough, we realized that we needed to do something more, because the amount of agility that is required at that point of time, we would not be able to deliver in the conventional way of working. So we pivoted the organization structure. We pivoted it into cross-functional teams to deal with the specific issues at hand. So there were people dealing with supply chain, how to get supply chain going, how to deal with search. There were people dealing with innovation, sensing out consumer requirements, and how do we craft out new value propositions and take them to the market. There were people dealing with COVID protocols, because for example, the EHS team became the COVID protocols team. And very important, again, there had to be constant engagement with people to keep the morale high, because as the pandemic unfolds, a lot will change. So there was a team that was looking at employees. So we kind of pivoted the organization and directed them at these specific areas so that decision making is faster. And we are quite happy with the results that we received. In about 10 days time, we had about 180 manufacturing locations up and running. We orchestrated interesting partnerships, very unusual partnerships to reach out to the customer and to the consumer, because the conventional distribution was disrupted. We redesigned distribution. During the year, we brought out about 100 products into the market. In fact, 50 within the first quarter itself, because as the pandemic unfolded, consumers wanted a lot of hand wash, they wanted sanitizers, and that kind of capacity was not existing in India. So in fact, sanitizer capacity, we multiplied 275 times. We repurposed perfume lines into sanitizer lines. And that also with a lot of it with directions given remotely. And then we brought out, disinfectant sprays, fabric disinfectant sprays. So as the needs of the consumer evolved from personal requirements to surface disinfectants, to fabric disinfectants, to out-of-home safety. So Savlon kind of traversed the journey with them and brought out products. And they were churned out and put into the market in a matter of weeks. So in a way, redefined paradigm of product development and consumer insight. The other I think, the facet that came very, very useful, and it's been, we've always been very focused on digital. We have invested in digital, but I think the pandemic opened our eyes to what we can achieve through digital and what role digital can play. And what does not happen in decades actually happened in weeks. And I'll give you a very interesting anecdote. We work with about 1.5 million farmers in the 27 aspirational districts to educate them on best agronomy practices. So when the lockdown happened, the question was, what do we do with this program? And that is, those are actually the people that need the most attention at the difficult period. So we actually pivoted again, and all the interfaces were changed to apps, video conferencing, WhatsApp, and the results were amazing. Whatever norms and objectives had been set for incomes increase were actually achieved when we measured them after the lockdown was there. So that's just the the power of digital. I'm just illustrating that to demonstrate how much as a society we have been able to do through digital and how much digital can do for us. So these are some of the I think important lessons for us, and I believe these lessons are important. The same lessons will help us go forward. We certainly need to be agile. We certainly need to be very cognizant of the requirements of our people, right. And not only our people in the ecosystem, and do whatever is required to be with compassion and empathy. And we are, of course, I would say all of us are much better prepared. We've been through it once, but I do understand that this time it's a much higher level of infection. And to me, the most important point to emphasize at this point to everybody, and we are saying this in the company, is the COVID appropriate behavior. Take all the safety measures, the masks, the hand washing, the sanitization, social distancing. And we are actually telling all the employees, like we did last time, that not only within the company, all of you take the responsibility to educate people in your social circles and in our business ecosystems. So that's one area that's going to receive very sharp thrust at the moment.
Okay, so you set the stage, and I'm going to use that now to go across to Mr. Narendran. Mr. Narendran, of course, you have experience on your side. We've just heard the ITC chairman, Mr. Sanjiv Puri, talking about the need to be agile, how he became agile, the organization became agile. My question to you is that exactly a year ago, at least you knew there was a lockdown. Today, when the second wave is raging, we don't know which way it's going to go. I'm reminded once again of the Prime Minister's statement, "Jaan hai to jahan hai." Given this kind of uncertainty, how are CEOs like yourselves supposed to be agile, not knowing what tomorrow is going to happen? Is it going to be a mini containment zone? Will there be a weekend curfew?
No, thanks, Nayanthara. I think it's important for organizations to build resilience, and that's what all organizations do. Agility is something that has been more recent, in something that we've been trying to build, and most organizations have been trying to build agility into the way they work over the last few years. And crises like this, give us an opportunity to test ourselves on whether we are agile enough, right? So I think what has happened since last year, and why we think we are slightly better prepared this year than last year, is last year when the lockdown happened, yes, we knew there was a lockdown, but we did not know it would be so complete, right? So I think for organizations like us with long supply chains, which extend across countries, across the country and across countries, it's it was very challenging at very short notice to make sure that all the consumables, critical consumables that are required to keep the steel plant running, keep coming in, right? This year, we are obviously better prepared, right? So even when the signals of the COVID case, signals whether the COVID cases are going up, we started looking at the supply chain, we started looking at our vulnerabilities, we started looking at what are the critical consumables which we have and which we don't have. And in case there is a lockdown, what are the markets that we can export to, so on and so forth. So I think the team, because of what it's gone through last year, is in a better position to explore the multiple options that may be available. And second thing is, last year when we went into the lockdown, we didn't know how the world economy would do, right? China was in pretty bad shape. The rest of the world was pretty much shutting down. Whereas this year, you're seeing a very strong and resurgent China as far as the economy is concerned. And you are seeing the US in a much healthier shape than it was last year. Also, all the governments, whether it's the EU, the US, China, including India, is spending a lot of money to restart economies. So I think macroeconomically, we are in a better place globally and in India. So I think our preparedness is also better. We certainly don't want a lockdown, but I think if it happens, I think we are better prepared than we were last year to respond to it.
Mr. Puri, part of being a good leader is also to see short-term versus long-term. We just heard Mr. Narendran saying we don't want a lockdown, but we are prepared for it. Short-term, long-term, where does industry stand? Jaan hai to jahan hai. What is the industry in favor of during this second wave?
See, the strategy that is being followed right now, of course, we don't know whether there will be a complete lockdown, is right now more targeted at areas where there are problems and certain restrictions. That's the strategy that is being targeted at. No doubt that this surge is very concerning, but we have to also, it's a very difficult decision because we have to balance out the whole challenge of lives and livelihoods. I do understand it's a very difficult situation, a challenging situation, because there are many people in the informal sector, small and medium enterprises, who get disproportionately impacted. And globally also, what is being said is that about another 200 million will get added to the unemployment kitty in the world, which was already at about 800 million prior to the pandemic. So we are talking about 1 billion people over time. So that is an issue that that also needs to be cognized for. So a strategy that is able to sharp target and create containment zones in places which are hotspots, put restriction on activities that are causing or are identified to be the cause of large scale spreading. I think that would be a better strategy. But if the situation so demands and there is a need to have a much sharper lockdown, then I think, as Naren said, I think the industry is better prepared to deal with that situation. But it is something that is evolving, and I think as it evolves, decisions will have to be made on whether it needs to be at a micro level or at a much larger level.
And ladies and gentlemen, keep sending in your questions and answers. The audience is sending them. And in fact, Mr. Puri, I do have one of them, and I'll take it for you right now because it's in continuation of what we were talking about. How prepared are you for multiple waves of COVID and lockdowns? You were just talking about this seems to be the strategy which might make more sense and more appropriate where we are at the moment, but it impacts supply, it impacts production, all of that. Are you already prepared?
Yes, I think as I said earlier, the lessons of the earlier year are very useful, and we have taken those on board. These are lessons that we have hardwired into the organization. Our processes and our planning has accordingly been modified to deal with this situation, so that we can respond to this situation as it evolves in a very agile fashion. So the lessons we have learned earlier are what is going to help us in the future. We are better prepared to deal with our supply chains. We our vendors, our ecosystem is better prepared. Inventories have been built up in anticipation of potential disruptions. We have our innovation teams working the same way as they did in the earlier years, listening to the voice of consumer and trying to identify what new trends or what new needs are emerging, and does it fit our capability to be able to meet the consumer need that is emerging. So all this is well in place, and therefore that's why I believe that we are well prepared to deal with it as we go forward.
Okay. Mr. Narendran, if I can come to you now, you made a very pertinent point that the global economy was very different than what it is looking like now. The recovery you're seeing in the US, the massive liquidity, which has also led to appreciation of all asset classes, the massive comeback of China, all of that. At the same time, we also had maybe one of the best union budgets in India in over a decade. Economists will perhaps have to go back and rework all of their projections, but given the strong macros, what does this mean for Tata Steel?
See, we are obviously very closely linked to macroeconomic activity. Steel industry is very closely linked to that. So we seem to be in a good place because, like I said, globally, there's a lot of spend on infrastructure, whether it's the US, whether it's China, and most importantly, India. India has traditionally had consumption-led growth, and we are probably starting to see the beginning of a decade of investment-led growth. And investment-led growth is more steel-intensive than consumption-led growth. So that's one thing which is happening. The second thing which is happening is that China has realized that if it has to come closer to becoming carbon neutral by 2060, which is the goal that they've declared, they need to really revisit whether they need to export steel, because steel is one of those hard to abate sectors. So China is really wondering, should it be exporting steel, which leaves a carbon footprint behind in China, import iron ore and export steel and leave a carbon footprint behind. So there are moves in China to discourage exports, which is good for the steel industry globally, because that used to be the problem for most of the last decade. The third thing which is happening is, if you look at Europe, carbon costs are already creeping up. The cost of carbon is about 43 euros a ton now, and that is having an impact on the cost of making steel in Europe. So there are multiple factors which are not only helping the demand side of steel, but also changing the cost structure for steel manufacturing in big steel producing regions like China and Europe. All this augurs well, I think, for the steel industry. In some sense, I think there'll be more stability, more consumption or more investment-led growth, better discipline in the marketplace, which is good for the Indian steel industry, because all of us are then ready to invest, to expand, to grow.
And what a time to expand, right? When you're seeing the sovereigns pump prime the economy and the super cycle of the commodities, the steel prices I'm talking about, Mr. Narendran.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think we should not get overexcited by the steel prices of today, but really look at, do we expect steel prices over the next decade to be higher than the steel prices over the last decade? And I do believe steel prices over the next decade will be higher than what it was in the last decade. May not be at today's level, but it certainly, things point towards it being higher than it was in the last decade, which is good, because that should trigger private sector investment in India and the steel industry. And India has been struggling for private sector investment, and I think steel industry can lead the way over the next few years.
So you expect these kind of prices to remain for some time? This will not mute demand?
Not today's prices, but certainly prices higher than it was for the last few years. Today's prices are abnormally high. I concede that.
Mr. Puri, that's a cycle you also have to deal with, the super cycle of commodities. And you talked about doing business with compassion. There are two aspects of it. As a leader, you have to lead with compassion when it comes to employees, but you also have to lead with compassion when it comes to your consumers. You're supposed to be obsessed with your bottom line. You're supposed to be rewarding your shareholders, all of that, but these are uncertain times. How do you manage all of this?
Well, we have always believed that whatever inflation happens, we should first of all look at ways of dealing with it through internal efficiencies and trying to look at all the actions that can mitigate the impact. And only as a last resort do we actually raise prices. And in the current situation, definitely it calls for even more caution when you're dealing with prices. It does call. So I think it will be a very considered view wherever pricing decisions are taken. The attempt will be to minimize it. The attempt will be to mitigate it through internal efficiencies. But yes, the reality is there are pieces in the commodity cycle where the inflation is quite huge. So one will have to keep a watch on that. That's a very clear monitorable, and therefore what decision we are finally able to take on that front is something we will have to look as we go forward.
Fair point. So you'll try and delay passing on the burden to the consumers until you absolutely have to and test it out. That's the sense I'm getting from you. Mr. Narendran, talking about leading with compassion, the Prime Minister has held meetings already about diverting oxygen meant for industrial use, for medical use. Can you share with us Tata Steel's views on this, what Tata Steel is doing at the time of this raging pandemic? Because these are also lessons in leadership.
Absolutely. From a Tata Steel perspective, and if I talk specifically of oxygen, even as we speak, we are today supplying 200 to 300 tons per day of oxygen to hospitals in and around Jamshedpur, certainly, but also in across Jharkhand state, as well as we've started supplies to UP, we've started supplies to Bihar, we've started supplies to Odisha, in Odisha as well from our plants there, and some of it is going to West Bengal as well. All this is being coordinated centrally, because today the bottleneck is not so much in the oxygen supply as in transportation and delivery of oxygen, because oxygen needs to get transported in cryogenic tankers, and there are only that many tankers available which can transport oxygen. Secondly, the bigger hospitals have oxygen tanks, but the smaller hospitals need oxygen cylinders. So oxygen needs to be supplied to the factories who will bottle it and supply it in cylinders. So the whole supply chain is being tested. The source is production of oxygen, which I think steel plants have in plenty, and I think steel plants are happy to support the government in any which way you can. And like I said, Tata Steel is already doing that in a very big way.
Both you, Mr. Narendra, and Mr. Puri in the past have been talking about the role the private sector can play for the country to fight COVID-19. Mr. Puri, if I can come to you now, what are some of the initiatives that ITC is planning, whether it is a vaccination drive, as we head into, what will be many, many mini lockdowns, if not a full lockdown? Can you share with us?
Well, really, I would say three points here. One, and to my mind, that's the most important, is continued focus on the COVID appropriate behavior, the mask, the social distancing, hand wash, sanitization, not only amongst our employees, amongst everybody who enters our premises, into our ecosystem, reaching out to the communities where we operate and trying to spread the message. So that's and also helping them by making some of these products available to those who are not able to afford it. So that's the first mission. The second activity is really to directly help communities where they are in a problem, where people have maybe like we saw in the earlier lockdown, there were lots of people who had lost, who earn a wage daily, who had lost jobs. So we actually converted all our kitchens in the hotels, all our kitchens into factories, and almost like community kitchens. We would produce it and have somebody deliver it to those who needed it. And also, of course, other packaged food products and hygiene products were distributed. So these are the two areas that we are certainly going to contribute towards. And the third is, of course, besides facilitating vaccination of our own employees, we are also supporting our entire ecosystem for vaccinations. We are, and there are in some pockets we do encounter some hesitancy also. So we are trying to provide them the information, connect them with some doctors who they can speak to and get convinced about it, bring them to certain locations when there are enough number of people at certain locations to be vaccinated, to try and arrange it at the location itself, so that more people can get vaccinated, and the hesitancy also goes away when they see others getting vaccinated. So our own employees and our ecosystem, particularly the partners who come from small and medium enterprises, micro enterprises who work with us, we are assisting them and we are kind of funding their vaccination as well.
I've got another question from the audience, and this is for you, Mr. Narendran. What gives Tata Steel immunity from COVID?
I think none of us have immunity in that sense, but I think the way the team has got together, the employees of the company are obviously very passionate about the organization, and they really got together during this time of crisis. Because one thing you must remember is in Tata Steel, we operate in some of the most remote parts of the country. So we have a responsibility not just to the business, but also to the community. And a lot of the community depend on us for medical care and for many other things. So the response was huge from the employees, and obviously the Tata Group responded as well, and Tata Steel front-ended that response, at least in Jharkhand and Odisha, in a very big way. So a lot has been done. A lot of time has been committed by our team. A lot of money has been spent. We, in some sense, started preparing for the COVID crisis maybe a few weeks before most people in India, because we knew what was happening in Europe by then. And so we had a sense of how big it could be. And so we started buying ventilators and PPE kits maybe sometime end of February. So we were better prepared. But I think our response has built the trust and equity that we have with the community and with the employees. And that's what gives us immunity, if you can call it that.
Okay. Mr. Puri, if I can come to you, I noticed this one phrase that you said, hard wiring of processes. They say it takes about 3 weeks to form a habit. Now, COVID and the resultant behavior should now be a lifelong habit. But when it comes to businesses and hardwiring of processes and productivity and all of that, can you share with us experiences and what the post-corona ITC is going to look like?
Well, see, during the pandemic, there are certainly some important lessons, and certain things have got reinforced. Certain things need to be reset. Now, the world was already facing serious issues of sustainability even before the pandemic. But during the pandemic, what did we see? One is we saw nature heal itself. Second, it accentuated the social fault lines in the society. And that became far more visible to everybody. So there is certainly a big awareness of the issues of sustainability in society today, and rightly so. Second, I think we've seen what digital can do. I think the best of digital is yet to come. So although we are very significantly invested in digital, there's a call for us to reimagine digital and look at how we can craft newer models and how it can power our processes today. And sustainability and digital are two defining trends for the decade. So we've actually started to address both these issues. We have made our aspirations on sustainability bolder. We call it Sustainability 2.0, which we've announced. We have set up some groups within the organization to actually innovate and reimagine digital for the future. So this is an area that is going to be very, very critical going forward. There are lessons on resilience and agility. There are lessons on how much we can achieve in a shorter period of time and in lesser amount of resources. There are very interesting lessons on that. And that is going to reset our own aspiration of benchmarks of how soon we can convert an idea and bring it to the market, or how soon we can reconfigure supply chains, or how soon we can ramp up or ramp down capacity. So it's going to be a reset. Now, within ITC has always believed on this whole principle of responsible competitiveness, which is really taking going beyond just mere shareholder value to societal value creation, embedding the whole social dimension and environmental dimension right into our corporate strategy. So we call that responsible competitiveness. Now, based on the lessons that we have learned, I would really now put a agility to it. So it's for us going to be responsible, agile competitiveness. So that feature of agility, I think, is going to get accentuated as a core purpose within our enterprise.
Absolutely. I never thought I would be able to order a dum-cooked biryani on Zomato, but you have, like you said, innovated. You came out with 50 new products in the first quarter itself. You're now opening hotels in the middle of COVID in Chel and Himachal Pradesh, all of that. Mr. Puri, what was the thinking behind that? Because, you know, this was also a time when everybody said burn the fat, focus only on the core. ITC did that, but it also showed how resilient it is by taking some of these kind of bets, particularly in the hospitality business.
Yeah, so you have to, you see, it's all about listening to the voice of the consumer, and we did this digitally. We have a consumer command center which we call the sixth sense. So it's about sensing what the consumers are saying, and then asking ourselves whether we have the capabilities and the enterprise strengths to be able to meet that requirement. And as we listened to it, many ideas emerged. There were consumers who were not able to, you know, go out to Dampot or Bukhara, but they still wanted to have a meal. They were all locked into their houses, so they did want to have a change. So then came the out of home, out of hotel gourmet couch and flavors of our kitchens. Similarly, we realized that as the pandemic was ebbing, there was a lot of interest in visiting leisure destinations, particularly. And right. All the consumers were looking for known brands, trusted brands, because they wanted to be assured that wherever they are going, the safety protocols would be followed. And that is where the opportunity arose for us to collaborate with people who had their own assets and wanted somebody to bring in the expertise and know-how and the brands behind it. So that's how hotels got launched. And similarly, you know, if we go back to FMCG also, you know, and Savlon, I think, is a very interesting story. It started off with just scaling up capacity of hand washes and sanitizers. And then we saw a lot of consumers were curious to know, how do I disinfect surfaces? You know, there was a requirement to keep doors open, keep the door handles clean, but how do I do it frequently? How do I do it easily? So that's where the Savlon disinfectant spray came in.
Yeah.
Then when winters came, you know, people would go out. People had started to go out by the time. And when you came in, people would want to have their clothes washed and laundered. But that's not possible with woolens. So that's where the whole idea of the fabric disinfectant spray came. Then there was a need for, how do I clean my vegetables and so on and so forth that I'm getting at home. That's how Nim Wash came. So it was all listening to consumers. And because we had also invested in certain platforms within our R&D setup, we could leverage that capability to quickly create new products and bring it to the market. So it's entirely, I would say, consumer driven and being very responsive.
Mr. Rendran, you don't have that much of a consumer interface, obviously, but I want to rely more on your expertise, you know, as far as the macros go. And also, you've been very vociferous about the role the private sector can play when it comes to vaccination. The US Fed chair has very famously now said, recovery will remain uneven and incomplete unless there is vaccination for all, not just in the United States of America, but worldwide. When it comes to India, we don't know as yet when vaccination is going to open up, but is industry still of the view that unless you're vaccine for all, we will not have the kind of recovery that has been envisaged, which the economists anyway may have to go back to the drawing board and rework their projections?
I think there are two parts to it, right? I mean, obviously, the sooner you can get everyone vaccinated, the better. That's clear. But let's also be practical, and that's not going to happen overnight. I think all of us have a responsibility as individuals to do the basic stuff, right? Social distancing, wear a mask, wash your hands, etc. And I find a lot of casualness in that across the country, and that makes it worse. You know, when we talk to the government is pretty much saying that there are enough vaccines for everyone over 45. So in the country, if it is the shortage somewhere, it's more a supply chain issue than a fundamental issue, right? So there is one part to it, which is about how do we make sure that everyone who is eligible gets vaccinated? And I think private sector has a very important role to play there. And if you really look at the numbers, there are a lot of people in our organizations who are eligible but have not got vaccinated. So you need to really do a vaccination drive, and manufacturing units like ours have started doing vaccination in the factories once the government has allowed that, right? So there is a driver on that. Secondly, a lot of our workforce is below 45, right? And so we need to make sure that they follow the protocols. We follow the protocols in the offices and in the factories. They follow the protocols, and that's an obligation all of us have to society. And if we don't do that, there's no point blaming the government and saying we don't have vaccine for all when we are not doing what we are supposed to do, right? So I think both needs to happen. And obviously, we need to make sure that the supply of vaccine increases. The government is now allowed imports. So this is going to happen. And I think 4 million vaccines a day is not bad at all. Of course, we need 8 million vaccines a day. But very few countries have done 4 million vaccines a day, and that too so fast, right? So we need to keep ramping that up. But as citizens, we also need to discharge our responsibilities.
As citizens and as industry, we all need to be responsible. Mr. Sanjiv Puri, with that, I come back to a point that you, for example, made, that how ITC tried to become as resilient. And even during the second wave, you've tried to ensure that supply chains remain resilient, that even if there are mini lockdowns, essential FMCG items, food items will reach your consumers. So once again, I touched upon it briefly with Mr. Narendran. Isn't it time the private sector supply chain is also used for vaccination?
Well, I think right now the vaccines are reaching the places where the vaccinations are to be done, and there could be some small gaps here and there sometimes because the reality is that it is a very complex activity, and whatever is getting manufactured is also getting consumed. So it's a complex activity. So right now, I think where private sector can play a role right now is once it has reached the destinations, which are the healthcare facilities, and whether it's government or private, how do we kind of work with them and facilitate vaccination of people so that it happens faster, it happens more seamlessly. So like, as Naren alluded to, this is what pretty much we are also doing. Wherever we have enough number of people over 45 years of age, we're tying up with the hospitals, getting the people to come into the factories and vaccinate there. So that's what we are doing. However, at any point of time, should when the volume scale up and there is a greater need for there is a greater complexity in logistics and the private sector can assist that. That is, private sector will be more than willing to assist that. There is no absolutely, when the need is there, we will be more than happy to do it. But at this point of time, as I see, the movement of the vaccines to various places is happening.
Okay.
And one should not expect that it's going to be absolutely perfect because there will be small issues here and there, given the fact that whatever we are producing is also getting vaccinated. There are no inventories, huge amount of inventories lying anywhere that right. But I think given what we are producing and where it is reaching, I think it's a fairly good system right now.
So as we talk about hardlining of processes, now, Mr. Narendran, I understand that when it comes to Tata Steel's case, at least in the factories, it's going to be very difficult to always have a work from home model. But work from home has become a habit of sorts now for the employees and the employers. How do you see this progressing in hardcore manufacturing companies like yourselves?
Yeah, Nayantara, actually, we started this journey of digitization about 3-4 years back. So we've been investing hugely in digital infrastructure, building capabilities, looking at remote manufacturing. How can you said, how can you have work from home in a factory? You can run a factory from your house if you're suitably connected in some sense of the term. I mean, not everyone can sit at home and run the factory, but a large number of people who today need to be in the factory don't need to be in the factory, in tomorrow's factories. So sensorization, digitization, having the infrastructure, collecting the data, being more predictive about what you do, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of that already happening. For all the people who are working out of office, we've already converted into a work from home, work from anywhere. Many people have opted to work from anywhere. You can be in any other city if your seniors allow that. So we brought in a lot of flexibility. It's more a trust and accountability based culture that we are driving rather than physically being in one place or the other. So we're being location agnostic. Secondly, we used a lot of technology, for instance, to even look at are people social distancing enough. For instance, anybody, any contract worker, any worker who enters a factory has an RFID card. So we would get alerts if we saw people collecting in places more than they needed to. So that helped us stagger the timings in our canteens and do many things. We brought in protocols called pods, where small groups of 4 to 12 people were working in isolated teams so that they couldn't, even if one of them tested positive, you isolated the whole team rather than the whole factory. So there were many such protocols brought into place, which helps us produce the 50,000 tons of steel that we produce every day and the 2.5 million tons of mining that we do every month to continue even during the crisis.
And Mr. Puri, you've anyway already said that you noticed productivity with digitization, the work from home models. So that's going to stay in the post-corona world?
Well, it certainly gives us flexibility. I believe that the work from home model worked well during the pandemic because there was enough social equity. There was enough bonding between the teams. And that it is that sense of bonding and social equity that enables you to work efficiently when you are working remotely. So I don't see that we will have a large scale migration to work from home, but yes, it certainly provides some flexibility, some options to have people working from different locations, or on some days or some particular periods for people to work from home. So these options will definitely emerge.
And as they emerge, and I'm not asking this as an employee, but this is a conversation that's been happening. Those that opt for the work from home model, should they be compensated as much as those that are willing to come to work?
Well, we haven't thought of making any differences. We're just thinking of making that as the option available to the employees, right? So not really, anything beyond that. I mean, everything.
What about you? You've been experimenting with this model for 3-4 years,
Yeah.
You've been saying.
No, I think work from home was a bit more forced on us, and we think it's a good idea. We will obviously have the flexibility for people to opt for work from home if their jobs allow that. We are not looking at it as cost saving from an employee cost point of view. In fact, in some cases, it may even cost us more. But it's more about how to drive productivity in the offices and of office spaces. Do you really need all the office spaces that you have? Do you really need to subject your employees to, in a city like Bombay, a 4-hour commute every day? And why do you need to do that if they can deliver what they're supposed to deliver from home? So I think it gives us a lot of flexibility to experiment with different models. And we are in the process of doing that. And I'm sure we'll find the right optimal way to not only engage the employees, get the best out of them, and get the best for the company.
Okay. Before I wrap up, I've just got a question for you, Mr. Puri, so I've got to take it, which basically is, what can the PLI, the Production Linked Incentive Scheme, do for the Indian food companies that they could not do by themselves?
Well, the quantum of food processing that happens in India is very small. It's in single digits. Now, these PLI scheme is meant to provide impetus to this whole food processing industry so that a larger percentage can be processed, as also provide impetus to exports. Now, if you step back and look at the larger picture, see, India is got the largest arable land in the world. Yet our share of the global exports of agriculture is only 2.5%. Our value add per unit area is also pretty low. The agriculture and food processing industry is an area where there are tailwinds, because globally, as population increases, at some time we will have nearly 10 billion people with better incomes and better nutritional uptakes. So there is a need for greater production. In fact, National Geographic some time back actually said that whatever all the farmers in the world have produced in the last 8,000 years need to be produced in the next 4 decades. So this is an industry that has got headwinds, and that's why if you look at the reforms and policy interventions that have happened in agriculture, whether they are at FPO level, cluster-based business organization, agri-infrastructure fund, and the market linkages, they are all helping us create a competitive agri-value chain. And the PLI now really fits in there to give impetus to value addition, because we do see an enormous amount of wastages. About 92,000 of agri-produce is actually wasted because of inefficiencies. And food processing has huge economic multipliers, best employment to capital ratio. It also will help in improving farmer incomes and reduce the wastages in the agri-value chain. So the benefits are enormous. So I think it's a welcome and good step to provide further impetus to this sector.
We're running out of time, so I'm going to make this the last audience question. Mr. Narendran, this is for you. What does Tata Steel understand by being Atmanirbhar?
I think India is the best place to be Atmanirbhar in steel. You know, there's no other country in the world which is blessed with the geological richness that India has, and also blessed with the large potential market that India has. You know, China has a market, doesn't have the raw materials, at least for steel making. Australia and Brazil have the raw materials, but don't have the market. So we are blessed to have both. And if we can't make Atmanirbharta in the steel industry, then we are really messing things up. So I think India has a potential to be, it already is the second largest producer of steel in the world, but we are still 10 to 15% of what China is doing, right? So I think there's a huge opportunity to grow this industry, create jobs in some of the poorest parts of the country, convert the richness below the ground to richness above the ground, and really support the manufacturing industry, which the government is keen on building. And I think in India, it is important to have manufacturing industry come in a big way. I don't think you can jump from agriculture to services without going through a phase where manufacturing plays a big role in creating jobs. And I think that's very important for the country, and the steel industry is, I think, ready to play a role there.
With that, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you both for being so candid, you know, on a busy day like this. Really appreciate it. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to the folks at AIMA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this, we come to the end of the day's proceedings. Thank you all for being part of the first day of AIMA's 6th National Leadership Conclave. We have another set of very exciting sessions lined up for tomorrow. We shall see you at 3 p.m. Have a pleasant evening ahead and good night.